30 years in the Postal Service taught me the simpler the surface, the more dangerous what lies beneath. And right before me, behind a happy family facade, is a carefully calculated scheme to seize my assets. "Sign it, Dad, and you'll be fine," my daughter says coldly, pushing the document forward. My hand trembles as I pretend to be senile, though my mind is razor sharp, glancing at her fiancé standing in the shadows with a triumphant smile. I lower the pen not to sign, but to write a number, and instantly both of them turn pale. The prey was only a disguise. The real hunter is me. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me, what are you doing right now while you listen? Are you driving, working, cooking, or maybe just winding down? I truly appreciate hearing from you. Quick note, some details in this story have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message it carries. 3 weeks ago, I made the most important decision of my life to say nothing. I sat on the weathered porch of my log cabin that Monday morning, black coffee cooling in my hands, looking out at the 47 acres my wife's family left us. The Georgia pines stood perfectly still in the April heat. No breeze, just silence and what was coming. My name is Irving Mercer. I'm 65, retired after 30 years with the Federal Postal Service. Most people think that means I sorted letters and drove a truck. What it actually means is I spent 3 decades learning to notice things, addresses that don't match signatures, that look wrong, packages that feel heavier than they should. Constance died 11 months ago at 64. Even now I could hear her voice, "Pay attention, Irving." She always saw things 3 steps ahead of me. The land stretched out before me, 47 acres of Georgia hill country, thick with oak and pine. I remembered what Constance told me the week before she passed. This land stays in the family. Whatever happens, Irving, this land stays with our grandchildren. I took a sip of coffee, stone cold. My daughter would arrive any minute. I knew what she wanted. I'd known for 3 weeks, ever since Vernon Weaver brought me cornbread and mentioned casual as anything that Adrienne's new fiancé looked familiar. I looked at my watch. 8:45. Gravel crunched under tires at 8:57. I didn't get up. Car door. Footsteps on the wooden steps. The front door opened without a knock. "Dad," I turned slowly. "Adrienne, sweetheart?" "Didn't hear you drive up." She stood in the doorway, 38 years old, and carrying the brittle tension of someone who'd rebuilt herself after a devastating divorce 2 years ago. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her jaw was set. She held a leather folder under one arm. "I called you 3 times yesterday. Did you? I must have left the phone inside." I could see the tightness around her eyes. Financial stress. I'd seen it before, back when her ex-husband Derek cleaned out their joint accounts. "Can I get you some coffee?" "Dad, I need you to focus." I stood slowly, joints creaking. "Come inside. It's getting hot." She followed me into the living room. The cabin wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a fireplace Constance and I used to sit by on winter evenings. I kept it the way she left it. Adrienne set the leather folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside was a thick stack of papers stapled in sections, tabs sticking out where I was supposed to sign. "Dad, I need you to sign these papers. The lawyer said everything has to be done by the 19th. I looked at the documents. Didn't touch them. "What are they? Transfer papers? For the land? We talked about this." "Did we?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes, last month. Corbin and I are forming an LLC. It's a tax shelter. You'd still live here, but the property would be under the company's name. It protects you from liability." I nodded slowly. "Corbin, that's your fiancé?" "Yes, Dad. The one I haven't met yet." "You've met him twice." "Have I?" She exhaled through her nose. "He came to Sunday dinner. Twice. You shook his hand." "I meet a lot of people," I said. "Hard to keep track." You might wonder how a man who spent 30 years delivering mail learned to spot a forgery. It's simple. You see enough real documents, the fake ones start to glow. These papers had the right weight, the right language, the right law firm letterhead. But the notary seal was laser printed, not embossed. The signature on page 7 didn't match the signature on page 12. And the transfer clause buried on page 19 would have signed over the land completely, no liability protection, no residency clause, nothing. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Sit down, sweetheart. Let me get you some coffee first. Dad, this is important. Corbin says we need to move fast on the LLC formation." I walked to the kitchen, poured her a cup from the pot I'd made 2 hours ago, added cream the way she used to like it, brought it back and set it on the table. "When's the deadline again?" "April 19th, 11 days. That's pretty fast." "Yeah, it has to be. There's a property assessment coming, and if we don't have the LLC filed before, then—" She stopped. "It's complicated, Dad. Just trust me." I looked at her. Really looked. She was scared. Not of me. Of something else. How long does it take for a daughter to stop seeing her father as a person and start seeing him as an inheritance? I don't know. But I know the exact moment I realized it had happened. 3 weeks ago, when Vernon said Adrienne's fiancé looked familiar. I picked up the papers, flipped through them, slowly squinting like the print was too small. "This is a lot to read. I can go through it with you." No. I'll look at it tonight." "You said the 19th. "Yes. That's plenty of time." Her shoulders relaxed. She thought I was giving in. "Actually, let me take these back. Corbin's lawyer can come by later this week with fresh copies and notarize everything. We'll make it easy for you." She gathered the documents, sliding them back into the leather folder. The relief on her face told me everything I needed to know. She'd expected resistance. Instead, she got a confused old man who couldn't remember meeting her fiancé. Perfect. She stood smoothing her skirt. "I'll call you tomorrow." "You do that." She kissed my cheek on her way out. Her perfume smelled expensive. Too expensive for someone who'd been crying poor 6 months ago. The door closed. The car started. Gravel crunched. I sat back down in Constance's reading chair and looked at the coffee table where the forged documents had been. What she didn't know was that I had been ready for this moment since the day Vernon Weaver mentioned her fiancé looked familiar. She thought she had 11 days to close the trap. What she didn't understand was that I'd been watching her build it for 3 weeks. 11 days. That's how long I had to let her believe she was in control. I had practiced this part for 3 weeks. The confused pause, the uncertain hand reaching for a name that wouldn't come. 10 minutes after Adrienne left, her car returned. She'd forgotten her phone. I was ready. She walked back into the living room and found me standing in front of the window, squinting at the land like I'd never seen it before. "And Dad," I turned, slowly blinking. "Oh, Adrienne, did you just get here?" Her expression shifted. Not concern. Relief. "I was here 10 minutes ago, Dad. I left my phone. You were—" I looked around the room like I was searching for evidence. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I must have dozed off. What were we talking about?" She picked up her phone from the coffee table and I watched her shoulders relax by maybe half an inch. "The land transfer papers. Remember you said you'd look at them tonight." "Wait." I held up a hand. "Is this about the property Derek wanted to buy?" "No, that was—" "When was that?" "Dad, it's Corbin, my fiancé. You met him 3 times already." Derek was Adrienne's ex-husband from her first marriage, the divorce that left her with debt and a fear of poverty she'd carried ever since. I knew mentioning his name would sting. Corbin. I nodded like I was filing the name away. "Right. The lawyer fellow. He's not a lawyer. He works in finance." Finance. That's what I meant. I sat down heavily in Constance's chair. Plot 17, that's the one by the creek, isn't it? Or no, that's not right. Your mother would know. Where did she put those old survey maps? Adrienne's whole face changed. The tightness around her mouth disappeared. She actually smiled. It's okay, Dad. You don't need to worry about the details. That's what I'm here for. You're a good daughter, I said. Meant it too. Once upon a time, she left the second time looking lighter, practically floated down the porch steps. I watched her taillights disappear and then went back to standing exactly where I'd been looking at exactly the same view of the pines. Let me tell you something about playing senile. The trick isn't forgetting details, it's forgetting the right details at exactly the right moment. Mix up names she'd expect me to remember. Confuse plot numbers she knows I surveyed with Constance dozens of times. Ask about survey maps that are sitting in the hall closet where they've been for 20 years. Make her feel like she's dealing with a confused old man who can't keep his own property straight, let alone understand LLC formation and tax implications. The hard part isn't the confusion. The hard part is keeping the performance subtle enough that she thinks she's the one who noticed it. Vernon Weaver showed up 40 minutes later. I heard his truck before I saw it. Old Ford diesel, same one he'd been driving since before Constance and I bought this place. He climbed out slow, 71 years old, and retired from farming the adjacent property for 40 years, carrying something wrapped in a kitchen towel. Irving, he called from the driveway. Vernon, come on up. He took the porch steps one at a time, favoring his left knee, set the bundle on the railing. Wife made cornbread this morning. Thought you might want some. Tell her I said thank you. I already ate half of it myself. He unwrapped a corner, and the smell hit me warm, buttery, still steaming slightly. You got coffee? Always. I went inside, poured 2 cups, came back out. Vernon had settled into the chair Adrienne sat in an hour ago. I handed him his coffee, black, no sugar, same as me, and unwrapped the cornbread the rest of the way. We sat quiet for a minute, the way neighbors do when they've known each other long enough not to fill silence with noise. Saw your daughter leaving earlier, Vernon said finally. Yeah, she stopped by. Seems like she's been stopping by a lot lately. I broke off a piece of cornbread still warm enough to melt on my tongue. She worries about me. Vernon sipped his coffee. That Corbin fellow, I've seen him twice now. Once at the market in Dahlonega, once at the Chevron near the courthouse. I didn't say anything. He looks mighty familiar, Irving. Can't quite place where I know him from, but it's nagging at me. The cornbread was still warm in my hands, but my blood had gone cold. Vernon wasn't the kind of man who forgot faces. He'd lived in Lumpkin County his whole life, knew every family within 50 miles, could tell you which ones had feuds going back 3 generations, and which ones married into money, and which ones lost everything in the recession. If Vernon said someone looked familiar, he meant it. And if he couldn't place where he knew them from, it wasn't because his memory was failing. It was because whoever it was didn't want to be remembered. Probably just has one of those faces, I said. You know how it is. Maybe. Vernon didn't sound convinced. But I'll tell you what, it's the kind of familiar that makes me want to look through old yearbooks. Like I knew him when he was younger, or I knew his daddy, or something along those lines. I took another sip of coffee, slow and steady, like my pulse wasn't hammering. If you figure it out, let me know. Oh, will do. We finished the cornbread, finished the coffee. Vernon stood to leave around noon, joints creaking, same as mine. You take care, Irving. You too. He drove off in that diesel Ford, and I sat on that porch until the sun started dropping behind the western ridge. Vernon left before sunset, and I sat on that porch until the sky turned purple over the pines. He'd said Corbin looked familiar, and Vernon Weaver had lived in Lumpkin County for 71 years, knew every face, every family, every story worth remembering. If he said a man looked familiar but couldn't place him, it meant he was trying to remember something he'd buried on purpose. I didn't sleep that night. At 11 that night, I sat at Constance's desk, under the yellow lamp she'd used for 40 years, and opened the will she'd made 2 years before cancer took her. Vernon's words about Corbin looking familiar had kept me from sleep. But this was something I could do. Something concrete I could hold in my hands and examine while my mind ran circles around questions I couldn't answer yet. The study was small, barely bigger than a closet. Constance had claimed it the day we moved in, filled it with her books, and the oak desk her father built in 1952. The room still smelled like her lavender soap and something else I could never quite name. Old paper, maybe. Or just time. I pulled the will from the filing cabinet. 23 pages, cream-colored stock bound with a blue cover. I'd read it once the week after the funeral, when Conrad walked me through the probate process. Everything straightforward. The land went to Adrian. The savings account, what was left after medical bills, split between Adrian and our son Hayes. A few small bequests to charities Constance had supported. I laid it on the desk and started from page 1. The first thing I noticed was the corner of page 7, folded, just barely. A tiny triangle at the bottom right, like someone had turned the page too quickly and creased it. Constance never creased pages. I looked closer. Page 12 had a thumbprint. Faint, but visible when the light hit it right. Bottom margin, left side. The oil from someone's skin pressed into the paper. Not my thumbprint, too small. I turned to page 15. Held it up to the lamp. Photocopy shadows. You learn to spot them after 3 decades in the Postal Service. That faint double image along the edge where the document doesn't sit perfectly flat on the glass. The slight variation in black density that means this page went through a machine sometime after it was originally printed. Someone had been in this room. Someone had touched what Constance left behind. I went through every page. Found 4 more with photocopy shadows. Found fingerprints, not mine, on 6 different pages. All pressed into the margins like someone had been studying every word, holding the paper carefully while they read. The filing cabinet lock showed scratches. Fresh ones. Someone had picked it or tried to, or maybe just forced it with something thin and metal. I sat back in Constance's chair and looked at her picture on the desk. Black and white photograph from our 30th anniversary 5 years before the diagnosis. She was laughing at something I'd said. I couldn't remember what anymore. "Who did this, Constance?" I said to the picture. "Who did our daughter bring into this house?" The picture didn't answer, but I could almost hear her voice anyway. "Pay attention, Irving. You already know." Her perfume, lavender, and something else I could never name, still lived in the wood grain of that desk. And for a moment, I forgot why I was there. Just sat in her chair in her study, surrounded by her books, and missed my wife so hard it felt like drowning. Then I looked at the clock. 11:47. I picked up the phone, put it back down. Conrad Lancaster wouldn't appreciate a call at midnight, but he'd want to know about this. He'd served as our family attorney for 15 years, handled Constance's estate, knew every detail of what she'd left behind. I waited until 7 the next morning, stood in the kitchen with coffee brewing, looking out at the backyard where Constance used to plant tomatoes every April. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Conrad Lancaster. His voice was alert. Always had been, even early morning. 58 years old and sharper than men half his age. "Conrad, it's Irving Mercer." "Irving. Everything all right? I need you to tell me the original is still in your vault." Silence on the other end. Then Constance's will. "Yes. It's there, Irving, sealed, same as the day we filed it." A pause. "What's happened?" I told him. The photocopying evidence, the fingerprints, the picked lock on the filing cabinet, Adrian's visit yesterday with the land transfer documents. The April 19th deadline. When I finished, Conrad didn't say anything for 10 seconds. You know what silence sounds like over a phone line when a lawyer who's known you for 15 years suddenly realizes he's looking at a crime. It sounds like air being sucked out of a room. It sounds like the moment before thunder. Describe the documents Adrienne brought, Conrad said finally. His voice had changed. Not friendly anymore. Clinical. I described them. The LLC formation. The transfer clause on page 19. The laser-printed notary seal. Irving. Conrad's voice was very quiet. Listen to me carefully. Don't sign anything. Don't tell Adrienne we spoke. And give me 48 hours. 48 hours for what? To make some calls. Check some things. I need to verify what I'm thinking. And I need to do it without tipping anyone off that we're looking. What are you thinking? That your daughter didn't write those documents herself? That someone with legal knowledge helped her? And that whoever it is made a very specific mistake that I need to confirm before I say anything more? My coffee had gone cold. I set it on the counter. Conrad, 48 hours, Irving. Tuesday morning to Thursday morning. Can you keep playing confused for 2 more days? Yes. Good. If Adrienne calls, you're still reading the documents, still trying to understand them. You need more time. You're thinking about it. Nothing more. All right. Then, and Irving. Whatever you do, don't let her know you've noticed anything wrong. Don't mention the filing cabinet. Don't mention the photocopies. As far as she knows, you're exactly what she thinks you are. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, holding a dead phone and looking at the calendar on the wall. 48 hours. That would take me to Thursday morning, April 11th. The deadline Adrienne had set was Friday the 19th. 7 days between Conrad's answer and my daughter's expectation. I poured myself another cup of coffee and realized I had just entered a countdown I didn't fully understand yet. What I didn't know was that Constance had understood it perfectly 14 months before she died. 14 months earlier in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and endings, Constance had gripped my hand and told me something I wouldn't understand until the morning Conrad called back. I hadn't thought about that conversation in months. Pushed it away maybe because remembering the hospital meant remembering how small she looked in that bed, how the cancer had taken everything but her mind. But standing in my kitchen on Thursday morning, waiting for Conrad's call, the memory came back sharp and clear. February 2022. 3 months before she died. I'd driven to the hospital. After morning visiting hours started, brought her crossword puzzles she was too tired to solve and coffee she couldn't drink anymore. She'd been awake, propped up on pillows, staring out the window at nothing. Irving, she said when I sat down. Her voice was thin but steady. I asked Conrad to make another will. I set the coffee on the bedside table. Another will, Constance, we just updated ours last year. Not for me, for Ivy. Our granddaughter, 7 years old. Adrienne's daughter from her first marriage before Derek left her with debt and fear. I don't understand, I said. I know. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. Irving, I asked Conrad to make another will. Not for Adrienne. For Ivy. Why not Adrienne? She's our daughter, Constance. She looked at me the way she did when I was missing something obvious. Patient. Sad. You'll understand why when the time comes. Just promise me you'll trust what I've done. Constance, promise me. I promised. She died 10 weeks later, and I never asked Conrad about the second will. Figured Constance had been confused or the morphine was making her imagine legal arrangements that didn't exist. Conrad never mentioned it during probate. So I let it go. Here's what I want you to understand. Constance saw 3 steps ahead of everyone always. Saw patterns I didn't notice, connections I couldn't make. She'd known Adrian was struggling financially before Adrian said a word. She'd known Derek was going to leave before he packed his first suitcase. And apparently, she'd known something about our daughter that I was only beginning to see now. The phone rang at 7:15 Thursday morning. I picked it up before the second ring. Conrad? Irving. His voice was different than Tuesday. Harder. We need to talk about what I found. I sat down at the kitchen table. Tell me. The signature on Adrienne's documents is nearly perfect. Whoever did this studied Constance's handwriting for months, maybe years. The pressure points are right. The slant is right. The loop on the C and the way she crossed her T characters, all of it matches. My coffee cup was empty. I didn't remember drinking it. But there's one mistake. Conrad paused. Constance never signed her full legal name on estate documents. Never. She always used Constance M., first name and middle initial only. I have 15 years of documents proving that pattern. It was a quirk of hers, said her full name was too long to write out every time. And the forgery uses Constance Eleanor Mercer, full legal name, beautiful signature, perfect reproduction of her handwriting, but wrong format. I looked out the kitchen window. The sun was coming up over the pines, same as it did every morning, like the world wasn't splitting apart. What does that mean? I asked. It means someone who had access to her signature for a very long time made this forgery. Someone who watched her sign things regularly. Birthday cards, checks, grocery lists. They studied the handwriting until they could reproduce it stroke by stroke. But they never saw her sign legal documents, never noticed the pattern. Who spends years studying someone's signature well enough to reproduce it stroke by stroke, curve by curve. Someone who lives with them. Someone who sees them write every day. Someone who has time and privacy and access to documents they can practice from. Emile, Conrad said quietly. This level of forgery takes practice. Lots of practice. We're talking hundreds of attempts over months or years, and the person would need somewhere to practice where they wouldn't be interrupted. Somewhere like a childhood bedroom in their father's house, I said. Conrad didn't answer, didn't need to. What do we do now? I asked. You do nothing yet. I'm filing paperwork with the probate court this morning, flagging the documents as suspicious. I'm also calling a friend at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation who specializes in document fraud. But Irving, listen to me, don't confront Adrienne. Don't tell her we know. If she realizes the forgery has been discovered, she might destroy evidence. We need her to believe everything is still going according to plan. How long? Until the 19th. That's the deadline she set, right? Let her think you're still considering it. Let her think you're confused and slow and can't quite make up your mind. And in the meantime, I'll be building a case. A criminal case, forgery, attempted fraud, possibly elder abuse depending on what else we find. This isn't a family dispute anymore, Irving. This is a crime. I hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen, where Constance had signed 1,000 things over 40 years, grocery lists, birthday cards, Christmas checks for the grandchildren. Someone had watched her sign all of it. Someone had practiced in secret page after page until they could write her name better than she could. Someone who had lived in this house. Someone who knew where Constance kept the will. Someone who knew when I'd be away long enough to pick the filing cabinet lock and photocopy every page. Someone who'd been planning this since before Constance died. And I knew exactly where to look for the evidence. Adrienne's old bedroom still smelled like her vanilla body spray, and something sharper I'd never been able to name, even though she hadn't lived there in 15 years. I'd come for a toolbox. Told myself that's all I was doing. The bedroom had become storage after she moved out, filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns and furniture we didn't use anymore. The toolbox sat somewhere behind her old desk, under a stack of Constance's quilting magazines. But my hands knew what I was really looking for. I moved the desk away from the wall. Dust came up in clouds, catching the afternoon light from the window. The desk was cheap particle board, the kind college students buy. Adrienne had used it through high school, and her first 2 years at Georgia Southern covered it with stickers and coffee rings that Constance could never quite scrub away. The bottom drawer stuck. Always had. I pulled harder. It came loose and something fell behind it, wedged in the gap between drawer and frame. A spiral-bound notebook. Student composition book, the kind you buy 3 for $1 at Walmart. Blue cover. No label. I opened it. Page after page of my wife's name written in Adrienne's hand, getting closer to perfect with each line. Constance Mercer. Constance Mercer. Constance M. Constance M. Constance Eleanor Mercer. Hundreds of repetitions. Some crossed out, some circled, some with notes in the margins, too much pressure, or loop wrong, or better. I flipped to the front. Top of the first page, dated in small print, February 2021. 2 years ago. Constance was alive then. Sick, but alive. Still sitting at the kitchen table signing birthday cards. Still writing checks for the electric bill. Still here. Our daughter was practicing her signature while she was still breathing. I turned pages, watched the signatures improve, watched Adrienne learn the exact pressure Constance used, the exact slant, the way her hand moved when she wrote the capital C, and the way she never quite finished the tail on the R in Mercer. Then about 40 pages in the practice changed. Irving Mercer. Irving Mercer. Irving Mercer. My name, my signature, over and over. I counted the pages dedicated to my name alone. 47. She'd practiced mine even more than Constance's. I want you to imagine finding evidence that your child has been planning to rob you since before your spouse died. That while you were taking your wife to chemotherapy appointments and holding her hand through the bad nights, your daughter was in this room practicing how to forge both your names. That she was planning this before the funeral, before the burial, before you'd even had time to understand that Constance was really gone. I sat on the floor of that dusty bedroom, holding a notebook that proved my daughter had been conspiring against me for 2 years. The toolbox could wait. I took the notebook to my truck, sat in the cab with the door closed, engine off, just holding it. The sun was setting. I'd been in that bedroom longer than I thought. I pulled out my phone and called my son. Hayes Mercer lived in Savannah, worked remotely as an IT engineer, visited maybe twice a year on holidays. 36 years old and still single, still living alone in a condo near the river. We talked every Sunday. Short calls, weather and work, and how was I holding up. He answered on the first ring. Dad, like he'd been waiting for it. Hayes, I need to tell you something. I told him everything. The notebook, Conrad's call, the forgery, the photocopied will, the April 19th deadline. All of it came out in one long stream sitting in that truck cab while the light died behind the pines. When I finished, Hayes didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, Dad, I need to tell you something. I saw Adrienne taking pictures of Mom's will on her phone. 2 weeks ago, the world stopped. What? She came to visit you, remember, first Sunday in April. You were outside working on the porch railing. She asked to use the bathroom, but I saw her go into Mom's study instead. I was coming in through the back door. She had her phone out, photographing every page. The silence on the phone line lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted them against my racing heartbeat. Why didn't you tell me then? I asked. Because I was afraid you'd confront her before we had everything we needed. I've been watching her dad. Quietly. I drove up last week and followed her to a meeting with Corbin at a lawyer's office in Gainesville. Took pictures of them together, got the address, found out. The lawyer's name is suspended from practice in 2 other states. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. You've been investigating this alone. Same as you. His voice was steady, calm. He sounded like his mother. I was going to call you this weekend, tell you everything I'd found, but it sounds like you've already figured most of it out. Hayes, we're going to stop her dad, together, you and me and Conrad. We're going to make sure she doesn't take what Mom left for Ivy. Ivy, the granddaughter. The 7-year-old Constance had protected with a second will I still hadn't seen. Conrad says we can't let her know we're watching, I said. Then we won't. You keep playing confused. I'll keep gathering information, and when the 19th comes, we'll be ready. We talked for another 10 minutes, made plans, coordinated. Became a team instead of 2 men working alone in the dark. I sat in that truck cab for 5 more minutes, after hanging up headlights off, watching the porch light Constance always left on for me. Hayes had known for 2 weeks. He'd watched our daughter commit fraud in real time and said nothing because he was protecting me the same way I was trying to protect him. We'd both been operating alone, and now we weren't. What neither of us knew yet was that we were going to need more than just each other. The woman sitting across from Conrad Lancaster in the corner booth didn't look like someone who spent her days investigating inheritance fraud, but that Conrad told me quietly was exactly the point. Hayes and I had driven separately to the cafe in Dahlonega Friday morning. Small place off the square, the kind where locals drink coffee and read the paper, and nobody pays attention to anyone else's conversation. Conrad was already there when I arrived, sitting with a woman I'd never seen before. She looked like a nurse, scrubs under a cardigan, hair pulled back. No jewelry except a watch, maybe 44, 45. The kind of person who could walk into a house and blend in completely. Irving, Conrad said as I slid into the booth. This is Simone Hoffman. She shook my hand. Firm grip. Direct eye contact. Mr. Mercer. Just Irving. Irving, then. She glanced at Conrad, who nodded. Conrad's told me about your situation. I want to help. Help how? Conrad leaned forward, keeping his voice low, even though the nearest occupied table was 20 feet away. Simone is a federal economic investigator. She's worked 3 inheritance fraud cases in Georgia over the past 5 years. All 3 resulted in federal convictions. Federal, not civil, not family court, prison time. I specialize in elder financial abuse, Simone said. Cases where family members exploit cognitive decline, real or fabricated, to steal assets. What's happening to you fits a pattern I've seen before. Adrienne thinks I have Alzheimer's, I said. Does she think that? Or is she hoping you'll be declared incompetent so she can take control? Simone's voice was gentle but direct. Because from what Conrad's told me, she's been planning this for at least 2 years. That's not opportunistic greed. That's systematic fraud. I told her about the notebook, the signatures, the dates going back to when Constance was alive. Simone didn't take notes, just listened, her expression unchanging, like she'd heard this story before in different variations. Here's what I can do, she said when I finished. I can enter your home as a private geriatric nurse. Conrad will introduce me through his office, completely legitimate referral. I'll perform a cognitive assessment, document your mental state, and present your daughter with a diagnosis that supports exactly what she wants to hear. You'll tell her I'm incompetent. I'll tell her you're declining. Advanced Alzheimer's. 6 to 12 months before you'll need a legal guardian for financial decisions. Simone met my eyes. And while I'm there playing that role, I'll be gathering evidence, recording conversations, documenting everything she says and does, building a federal case. Let me tell you what it feels like to sit across from a stranger and hand her every terrible secret your family owns. It feels like standing at the edge of something you can't take back, like opening a door you'll never be able to close. Ms. Hoffman, I said carefully, You understand, I'll be performing pretending to be someone I'm not. You must believe I'm completely lucid. She smiled for the first time. Small. Sad. Mr. Mercer, that's exactly why I'm here. And please call me Simone. We talked for another 40 minutes. Worked out the details. Conrad would call Adrian that afternoon, mention he'd found a private nurse who specialized in geriatric care. Someone who could help manage my declining condition. Make it seem like his idea. Simone would show up Saturday morning. I drove home alone. Hayes heading back to Savannah to maintain the illusion that he was uninvolved. The April sun was warm through the windshield. Spring coming on strong. Constance would have been planting tomatoes this week. Saturday morning came fast. Simone arrived at 10, carrying a professional medical bag and a folder thick with official-looking documents. I was sitting in Constance's chair when Adrian let her in. I'd called my daughter Friday night, mentioned Conrad had found a nurse, asked if she'd come by to meet her. Adrian had said yes immediately. Too immediately. Simone shook hands with both of us, settled onto the couch, pulled papers from her folder. Ms. Mercer, I wanted to review your father's cognitive assessment with you. The progression is significant. She laid out charts, test results, brain scan images that looked official and meant nothing because they weren't mine. A complete medical fiction built to look like truth. Adrian read every page, slowly, carefully. I watched her shoulders relax, watched the tightness leave her jaw, watched her nod almost imperceptibly, like she was checking items off an invisible list. How long before? Adrian paused, looked up at Simone. I mean, what's the timeline for legal capacity issues? You know what relief looks like on someone who's been waiting for their father to be declared mentally incompetent. It looks like my daughter's face in that moment. Smooth, calm, almost happy. 6 to 12 months before he'll require a legal guardian for financial decisions, Simone said. Professional, clinical, perfect. It's important to establish those arrangements soon. Power of attorney, medical directives, asset management. The earlier you handle these things, the smoother the transition. Oh, of course. Adrian set the papers down gently. I've actually already started looking into some of that. LLC formation to protect the property, that kind of thing. Very prudent, Simone said. I sat in my chair, hands folded, staring at nothing, playing the part of a man whose mind was slipping away. Inside, I was cataloging everything, every word, every micro-expression, every tell that proved my daughter wasn't concerned about my health. She was relieved by my decline. When Adrian left that afternoon medical report clutched in her hand, like a winning lottery ticket, Simone turned to me from the kitchen where she'd been arranging pills that were actually vitamins. She didn't say anything, just raised one eyebrow. And for the first time in 3 weeks since the morning my daughter walked in without knocking, I smiled. A real smile. Because now we had 3 people, and Adrian thought she was watching me decline when she was actually starring in her own federal investigation. My son shook the hand of the man who was trying to steal everything I owned, and his smile never faltered once. Hayes arrived Sunday afternoon, same as he always did when he visited Cargo Pants, Georgia Tech sweatshirt driving his sensible Honda. I watched from my chair as Adrian introduced him to Corbin Riddle for the first time. Corbin was 42, walked into my living room with the confident smile of a commercial real estate broker who'd never lost a negotiation. Tall, clean-shaven, expensive watch. The kind of man who knew exactly how much his handshake was worth. Hayes, good to finally meet you, Corbin said, extending his hand. Your sisters told me so much about the family. All good things, I hope. Hayes shook firmly, grinning like he was genuinely pleased to meet his sister's fiancé. Sorry I haven't been around much. Work keeps me down in Savannah most weeks. IT right, Adrian mentioned you're doing remote work. It's on network security, boring stuff mostly. They sat on the couch while Simone made coffee in the kitchen, playing her role as my nurse. Adrienne looked pleased, relaxed, like everything was finally coming together the way she'd planned. Corbin spent 20 minutes explaining his vision for the family's financial future. Asset management, LLC protection, tax advantages. He spoke in the smooth language of someone who'd given this presentation before, probably to other families with aging parents and valuable property. The key is getting everything in place while Irving can still participate in the process, Corbin said, glancing at me sitting in my chair. While he's lucid enough to understand what's happening, that's why the timeline matters. Makes sense. Hayes nodded, leaning forward like he was genuinely interested. And you think April 19th gives us enough time to file everything? If we move efficiently, yes. Conrad's office has all the paperwork ready. We just need your father's signatures. Hayes looked at me. Dad, you understand all this? I blinked slowly, squinted at Corbin like I couldn't quite remember who he was. Is this about the property? Yes, Dad, Adrienne said gently. We talked about this yesterday. Remember? I remember some of it. Conrad's involved, right? That's right. I nodded vaguely and went back to staring at nothing. Hayes turned back to Corbin. Whatever you both think is best, I'm on board. I just want to make sure Dad's taken care of properly. That's exactly what we want too, Corbin said, his smile widening. It's good to have the whole family aligned on this. I watched my youngest son lie to my oldest daughter's face, and I'd never been more grateful for anything in my life. Because Hayes's watch, the one that looked like a regular fitness tracker, had a microphone Simone had given him Friday night. And every word Corbin spoke about timeline and signatures and asset management was being recorded in perfect digital clarity. They stayed another hour, drank coffee, made small talk. Hayes played his part perfectly, the passive younger brother who'd always deferred to his older sister, who didn't understand finances, who just wanted someone else to handle the complicated stuff. When they left, Hayes caught my eye for just a second, tapped his watch once. Message received. Monday morning, I executed the next phase. I created a file. Thick manila folder labeled in my own handwriting, Investigation, Forsyth County Land Project, Suspicious Partner. Filled it with printouts about a property development 3 hours away that had nothing to do with anything. Added notes in the margins. Made it look like I'd been researching something that worried me. Left it on my office desk, not hidden, not locked away, just sitting there visible to anyone who walked past the open door. Then I went to the garden. I'm going to check on those roses your mother planted. I called to Simone, who was in the kitchen organizing my actual medication. Been neglecting them. Take your time, she called back. I spent exactly 20 minutes outside. Pulled weeds. Deadheaded the early blooms Constance had planted 5 springs ago. Gave whoever was in the house enough time to find what I'd left for them. Adrienne had visited that morning. Said she wanted to check on me, see how I was feeling. But I knew why she was really there. When I came back inside, the office door was still open. The file sat exactly where I'd left it, or where I'd left it to look like I'd left it. I picked it up. Felt the weight. Noticed immediately that the corner wasn't quite aligned the same way. The pages had been flipped through carefully, professionally, and returned to approximately their original position. But not exactly. She'd read every page of that investigation that didn't exist about a county 3 hours away, that had nothing to do with anything. Here's what you need to understand about setting a trap. The bait only works if they think they discovered it themselves. If I'd told Adrienne I was worried about some business dealings in Forsyth County, she'd have been suspicious. But letting her find evidence of it, letting her think she was spying on my private concerns, made it real in her mind. Now she'd be wondering if I had assets she didn't know about. Business partnerships she hadn't discovered. Money hidden somewhere beyond the property and the bank accounts she'd already mapped out. She'd be distracted, chasing shadows, while we built the real case right here in Lumpkin County. I called Simone from the garden 30 minutes later, standing among Constance's roses with my phone to my ear. "The file's been moved," I said quietly. She didn't sound surprised. "Good. Now she thinks you're distracted by Forsyth County while we build the real case right here in Lumpkin. How's the recording from yesterday?" "Hayes sent it to me last night. Corbin gave us enough to prove conspiracy. He explicitly referenced timing the signatures to your cognitive decline. That's consciousness of guilt." I looked up at the sky. Clear blue. April warm. "How much time?" 4 days until April 19th. 4 days until Adrian expects you to sign everything over. And then we show her what happens when you try to defraud a federal witness. I didn't understand that last part. Federal witness. But before I could ask, Simone had already hung up. I stood there in the garden surrounded by flowers my dead wife had planted, holding a phone that connected me to people building a case against my own daughter. What we didn't know yet was that Vernon Weaver had finally remembered where he'd seen Corbin Riddle before. When Vernon Weaver showed up Tuesday evening without cornbread, I knew whatever he'd remembered was going to change everything. He climbed the porch steps slower than usual, favoring his bad knee more than he had 2 weeks ago. Twilight was settling over the pines, turning everything the color of old pennies. He carried something folded under his arm. Not food. Paper. "Irving," he said, sitting down in the chair beside mine without asking. "I found it." He unfolded a newspaper. Local edition from 2007. Yellowed at the edges, the kind of thing you keep in a box in the garage for years without knowing why. Pointed to a courthouse photo. Black and white. 3 men standing on the steps of the Lumpkin County Courthouse. One of them was me younger, wearing the suit I'd bought for Constance's father's funeral. Another was a judge whose name I couldn't remember anymore. The third was a man in handcuffs. "Here," Vernon said. "I remember now. That Corbin fellow is the son of Harlan Doss, the prisoner you testified against back in 2007. Harlan Doss." I stared at the photo. The man in handcuffs had Corbin's eyes. Same shape, same way of looking at the camera like he was calculating something. "Harlan threatened me over disputed property line," Vernon continued. His voice was quiet, careful. "Went to prison for it. Died there in 2019. I knew I recognized the face, but it took me this long to remember why. The son looks just like him, Irving. Just like him." "His son's been waiting," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Planning. And now he's engaged to my daughter." Vernon nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. Figured you should know before whatever you're planning to do about those documents Adriana's been waving around." I looked at my neighbor. 71 years old, known me for 40 years, brought me cornbread, and kept his mouth shut about things that weren't his business. "Thank you, Vernon. You need help, you call me. I mean that." He left before full dark, and I sat on that porch, holding a 16-year-old newspaper, understanding, for the first time, that Corbin Riddle hadn't found my daughter by accident. He'd hunted her. Let me tell you what it feels like to realize someone's been planning to destroy you since before you knew they existed. It feels like falling through ice, like reaching for solid ground and finding nothing but cold water pulling you down. Corbin had been waiting since 2007, 16 years. His father died in prison, and the son spent the next 4 years, maybe longer, finding a way to hurt the man who put him there. Found Adrian. Learned about her divorce, her debt, her fear of poverty. Courted her. Proposed to her. Convinced her to help him steal from her own father. Revenge dressed up as love. I should have called Simone, called Conrad, called Hayes, but I didn't. Instead, I went to bed and lay awake staring at the ceiling while my mind chewed through every conversation I'd had with my son in the past 2 weeks. 2 in the morning, the worst thoughts come. Hayes knew 2 weeks before I did. Saw Adrienne photographing the will and said nothing. Why he claimed he was protecting me, gathering evidence, being strategic. But what if that was the lie? What if Hayes knew because he's part of it? What if they're working together? He's always been close to Adrienne, always defended her. Even when she divorced Derek and everyone else said she should have seen it coming, Hayes took her side, sent her money when she couldn't make rent, let her stay in his Savannah condo for 3 months while she got back on her feet. And Hayes had skills I didn't understand. IT work, network security. He knew how to access systems, manipulate data, make things appear and disappear in the digital world, where everything important lived now. If he wanted to help Adrienne steal from me, he could do it better than Corbin ever could. How do you know who to trust when the people trying to rob you are the same people you raised, taught to tie their shoes, drove to baseball practice? I lay in that bed, the same bed Constance and I had shared for 40 years, and felt more alone than I had since the day they told me the cancer had won. If my son is lying to me, then I'm fighting this alone, truly alone. The ceiling didn't answer. The house was silent except for the settling sounds old houses make, the creaks and sighs that used to comfort me, and now just sounded like evidence of everything falling apart. I thought about calling Hayes right then, demanding the truth. But if he was lying, he'd just lie better. And if he wasn't lying, I'd have revealed my suspicion to the one person I couldn't afford to lose. 4 in the morning, I was still awake. 5, the sky started turning gray through the bedroom window. 6, I gave up on sleep entirely. At 6:15 Wednesday morning, I called Hayes. He answered on the second ring. "Dad, you okay?" "Son, do you remember the day your mother taught you to swim?" Silence on the other end. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then, "Yes, Dad. Mom pushed me into the deep end and told me to swim or drown. I swam. Only our family knows that story. Constance never told anyone outside the house about her teaching method, one sudden push into deep water at the county pool when Hayes was 7, sink or swim, no warnings. He'd swum. Cried afterward, but he'd swum. No one outside our family knew because we'd agreed never to tell anyone. Child Services in 1991 wouldn't have appreciated Constance's philosophy. I breathed out for what felt like the first time in 6 hours. "Thanks, son," I said. "Dad, what's going on?" "Just needed to hear your voice." I hung up before he could ask anything else. Sat on the edge of the bedphone in my hands, exhaustion pulling at my bones like gravity. Hayes was still on my side, still my ally. The paranoia had been just that, paranoia. A tired old man's fear eating him alive in the dark hours when the world felt like it was ending. But even with Hayes confirmed as an ally, we still didn't know just how deep Corbin's planning actually went. Simone's hand stopped moving across the keyboard, and when she turned to look at me from my office desk, her face had gone completely flat in the way I'd learned meant she'd found something terrible. Wednesday afternoon. Hayes was confirmed as an ally. Corbin's identity as Harlan Doss's son was confirmed as revenge. But we still didn't know the full scope of what we were facing. Simone had been running Corbin's financial background through federal databases for 2 hours. I'd brought her coffee, sat in the corner chair, watched her work in silence. Then she stopped. "Irving," she said quietly. "Corbin Riddle put down $150,000 on a property in Naples, Florida, 10 days ago." I set my coffee down slowly. 10 days. April 7th. She turned the laptop screen toward me. Bank records, property listings, transaction histories I couldn't fully parse but understood well enough. That was before Adrienne even came here asking for signatures. Before any of this officially started. He was that certain. He was that certain, Simone confirmed. And Irving, the account structure is concerning. The deposit came from an intermediary account opened in Adrienne's name, but she doesn't have access to it. Corbin's the sole authorized user. He can move money in and out, but she can't touch it. I looked at the screen. Numbers and account codes that might as well have been another language. Explain what that means. It means he set this up, so when she's gone, he inherits as her fiancé. The property's technically in her name. The account's technically in her name. But she has no control, no access, no ability to stop what's coming. And when she dies, he gets everything. My daughter was engaged to a man who'd already started spending her inheritance before planning to kill her for it. Simone closed the laptop. The account structure matches 3 other cases I've worked. Always the same pattern: partner gains access to victim's assets, transfers them to accounts the victim can't touch, then eliminates the victim and inherits as legal beneficiary. In 2 of those cases, the deaths were ruled accidental. Car crashes, 1 drowning. What happened in the 3rd case? We caught him before he could finish. Woman's alive, testifying at his trial next month. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the land Constance had left behind the pines, and the field, and the cabin where I'd raised 2 children who'd turned out so differently I couldn't reconcile them in my head anymore. She doesn't know, I said. Adrienne doesn't know he's planning to kill her. No. Simone agreed. She thinks they're partners. She thinks once the property transfers, they'll split everything and start a new life in Florida. She has no idea the life she's imagining ends with her death. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. Can we prove this? The murder intent. Not yet. But the financial pattern is enough to open a federal investigation. And once we arrest Corbin for the fraud and forgery, we can search his communications. If he's been planning this, and I believe he has, there'll be evidence. Searches about accidents, research on inheritance law, something that shows premeditation. Thursday afternoon, Adrienne came alone for the first time in days. I was sitting on the porch when she drove up. No black Mercedes following. No Corbin climbing out of the passenger seat with his confident smile. Just my daughter, 38 years old, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Duh, she said, climbing the steps slowly. Can I come in? Of course. She sat on the couch where Corbin had sat Sunday. Simone appeared from the kitchen, quiet and professional in her nurse role, offering chamomile tea that Adrienne accepted with both hands, like she needed something to hold on to. We sat in silence for a while. Adrienne sipped her tea. Watched Simone arrange my actual medications in the weekly pill organizer on the kitchen counter. Didn't say anything about the documents or the deadline or the LLC Corbin had spent 3 weeks telling her was urgent. Finally, she looked at me. Dad, do you remember when I was little? You used to read to me on that porch every night before bed. I remember. Mom would put Hayes down first, and then you and I would sit outside with whatever library book I'd picked that week. You'd read until I fell asleep, and then you'd carry me inside. You always picked books that were too long, I said. Took us months to finish some of them. I miss that. Her voice cracked slightly. I miss you. How do you hate someone and love them at exactly the same time in the same breath for the same reasons? I looked at my daughter, saw the scared woman Corbin had found, the divorced woman with debt and fear, the woman who'd been so desperate not to be poor again that she'd convinced herself stealing from her father was somehow justified. And underneath all of that, I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap while I read about dragons and wizards and heroes who always won in the end. I'm still here, sweetheart, I said quietly. She set her teacup down, wiped her eyes quickly like she didn't want me to see. Corbin says we should finalize everything tomorrow. He says it's time. Tomorrow, I repeated. April 19th, like we planned. She left 10 minutes later. Said she had errands to run. Kissed my cheek on the way out. Told Simone thank you for the tea. I walked her to the door and watched through the window as she got into her car. But she didn't drive away immediately. She sat there for 30 seconds, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Then Corbin's black Mercedes pulled up behind her and she drove. He followed. He always followed. I stood at that window long after both cars disappeared, understanding finally that I wasn't just fighting to protect my property or honor Constance's will or punish fraud. I was fighting to save my daughter's life from a man she thought loved her. Tomorrow was April 19th, the deadline, the confrontation, and the day everything I'd built for 3 weeks would either save my daughter or destroy her. Task 3.5. Hayes set up 2 monitors on his old bedroom desk like he was preparing for war, which I suppose he was. Friday afternoon. April 19th, the deadline Adrian had given me 3 weeks ago. But the actual confrontation wouldn't come until Sunday. We had 48 hours to make sure everything was perfect. Hayes had driven up from Savannah with his Honda packed full of equipment. Monitors, cables, a laptop that looked like it cost more than my truck. He'd been working on this system for 2 weeks, he said, building it in secret between his regular job and sleeping. Look, Dad. He turned one monitor toward me. This is what they'll see, exact replica of your Wells Fargo account. Balance, transaction history, everything. I leaned closer. It looked perfect. The bank logo in the corner. The blue and yellow color scheme I'd seen 1,000 times on my own computer. Even my account balance pulled from live data, somehow Hayes explained, so it would match exactly what I actually had. When Corbin or Adrian tries to transfer funds, it routes here instead. He pointed to the second monitor showing what looked like server code scrolling past. Directly into Simone's recording server with federal timestamps. Every keystroke, every click, every amount they try to steal. All documented with exact time and date. And it won't actually transfer the money. Not a cent. The transaction fails on their end, looks like a system error, but we'll have complete evidence of attempted wire fraud. I'm 65 years old, spent 30 years delivering mail, and my son was showing me how to commit federal entrapment in the service of justice. Are you sure this will work? I asked. Hayes looked at me. Really looked. Dad, I've tested it 20 times. Simone reviewed the code herself. It's foolproof. When Corbin sits down at that laptop Sunday morning and tries to steal from you, we'll have him on federal wire fraud charges that carry 10 to 20 years. And Adrienne, his face changed. Harder. Sadder. She'll be charged as an accessory. Conspiracy, forgery. The fact that Corbin manipulated her might help at sentencing, but she still committed crimes. We sat in silence for a moment. The monitors hummed quietly. Outside, the April sun was starting to set behind the pines. I know she's your sister, I said finally. Yeah, she's also a criminal. Hayes's voice was flat. I love her, but I love you more. And I love what Mom built for this family more than I love protecting Adrian from consequences she chose. He showed me the rest of the system. How Simone would monitor everything remotely from her phone. How the recording would be admissible in federal court. How Conrad had already filed the preliminary fraud complaint that would let authorities move the moment we had evidence. It was perfect. Professional. The kind of trap that took expertise and planning and resources I didn't have. But Hayes did, and Simone did, and Conrad did. I'd spent 3 weeks thinking I was fighting this alone, and I'd built an entire team without quite realizing it. Saturday night at 11. I sat in Constance's reading chair for the first time since her death. Hayes had gone to bed. Simone was in the guest room reviewing tomorrow's plan. The house was quiet except for the settling sounds old houses make and the occasional car passing on the road. The chair still smelled like her lavender sachets, and for a moment I couldn't remember why I was sitting there instead of her. Then I remembered. Cancer. 11 months ago. The funeral where Adrienne cried and Hayes stood silent, and I couldn't feel anything except the weight of promises I'd made to a woman who wouldn't be there to see me keep them. The chair held a subtle indent from her shape. 4 decades of reading in this exact spot had formed the cushions to her body, and now I sat in that space feeling like an intruder. "Wife," I said quietly to the empty room, "tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock our daughter will come here with that man." The house didn't answer, just creaked and settled and held its silence. She's about to fall into her own trap. I'm not happy about it. But I won't let what you left disappear. I thought about the will Constance had made 14 months before she died. The one Conrad showed me after our daughter tried to forge documents. The one that left everything to Ivy, our granddaughter, 8 years old, who'd inherit this land when she turned 25. Constance had seen it coming. Had known Adrienne's fear of poverty would make her vulnerable. Had known someone might use that fear against her. Had protected the next generation before the threat even appeared. "You saw this coming before I did," I whispered. "You always did. I'm just trying to finish what you started." I sat there recounting everything in my head. The notebook filled with signature practice. Hayes's alliance and his sophisticated trap. Simone's federal investigation. Vernon's memory about Harlan Doss. The Florida property deposit that proved Corbin planned murder. 3 weeks of building a case. 3 weeks of playing confused. 3 weeks of letting my daughter believe she was stealing from a senile old man who couldn't remember her fiancé's name. And tomorrow, it would all come down to 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I sat in that chair until past midnight, then went to bed and actually slept 3 hours of dreamless black sleep that felt like falling. When I woke Sunday morning at 6, Hayes was already in the kitchen making coffee. The smell pulled me out of bed. I found him standing at the counter, 2 mugs ready, looking out the window at the land. "Today's the day, Dad," he said. I nodded, took the coffee he offered, drank it black and hot and bitter. 9 a.m. Adrienne would arrive with Corbin carrying documents and greed, and no idea that every person in this house had spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. Simone emerged from the guest room at 7, already dressed in her nurse scrubs. Hayes went to his bedroom to set up the final monitoring equipment. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the clock move toward confrontation. Chapter 4 would begin with the sound of Corbin's car pulling into my driveway. The sound of Corbin Riddle's car pulling into my driveway at 9 o'clock Sunday morning was the quietest, most ordinary sound I'd heard in 3 weeks, and the most terrifying. I was sitting on the sofa where Constance and I used to watch the evening news. Faded flannel shirt, old jeans with a patch on one knee, hands resting on my lap, trembling slightly, the way I'd practiced every morning for 3 weeks. Hayes was in his bedroom monitoring the equipment. Simone stood in the kitchen doorway arranging vitamin bottles that looked like prescription medications. The Mercedes door opened, then another. Footsteps on gravel. Voices. I kept my face blank, confused, waiting. The front door opened without a knock. "Dad." Adrienne's voice, gentle, patient, the way you talk to someone whose mind is slipping. "It's me. Corbin's here too." They walked into my living room like they owned it, which I supposed was exactly what they were planning. Corbin wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck, carried an expensive laptop in one hand, smiled like a commercial real estate broker closing a deal he'd already won. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," he said, extending his hand. "Beautiful day, perfect for finalizing these arrangements." I looked at his hand for 3 seconds too long, then shook it weakly. "Morning. You're Corbin, right? Adrienne's..." Fiancé, yes, sir. He glanced at Simone in the kitchen, nodded politely. And you must be the nurse Adrienne mentioned. Thank you for taking such good care of Mr. Mercer. Simone smiled professionally. Just doing my job. Corbin surveyed the room. I watched him catalog everything: the senile old man in his worn-out clothes, the professional caregiver organizing medications, the compliant daughter carrying a manila folder full of documents. Everything exactly as he'd planned it. I want you to understand something. I'd spent 30 years as a federal postal worker, and I knew exactly what happens to people who commit wire fraud. I'd seen the investigations, delivered the subpoenas, watched federal agents show up at houses at dawn with warrants and handcuffs. Corbin thought he was walking into an easy theft from a confused old man. He had no idea he was walking into a federal sting operation. Adrienne tells me you've been having some good days and some difficult ones, Corbin said, settling into the chair across from me. How are you feeling this morning? I'm feeling... I blinked slowly. I'm okay, I think. What day is it? Sunday, Dad. Adrienne sat beside Corbin, manila folder on her lap. Corbin brought the papers. Remember, we talked about this last week. Did we? I looked at her. Really looked. She couldn't meet my eyes. Just stared at the folder, at Corbin, at anything except her father's face. Corbin opened his laptop. Smooth. Professional. The performance of a man who'd done this before, probably to other families with vulnerable parents and valuable property. Mr. Mercer, I want to walk you through what we're proposing. It's very simple, very protective, all designed to make your life easier. He turned the laptop screen toward me, showed me documents I couldn't fully read from this distance but pretended to squint at anyway. This protects you, Mr. Mercer. You'll never have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, any of it. We handle everything. Property taxes, I repeated slowly. On the land, on all 47 acres, yes, sir, plus the cabin. Everything gets transferred to a new LLC that Adrienne and I will manage on your behalf. You retain full residency rights for life. You'll never have to leave. Never have to worry about upkeep or bills or anything complicated. Adrienne leaned forward. Dad, it's really the best solution. You get to stay here live exactly like you always have, but without all the stress of managing everything. The LLC ensures professional management while you retain full residency rights for life, Corbin continued. His voice was soothing, hypnotic. The kind of voice that made complicated theft sound like generous protection. It's the best solution for everyone. How do you sit there and watch your daughter look at a man who's planning to murder her like he's her savior? Because that's what I was seeing. Adrienne watching Corbin with trust, nodding at his explanations, believing every word. She had no idea that the man explaining lifetime residency rights had already put down money on Florida property in her name, property she'd never lived to see. Corbin reached into his laptop bag and pulled out a document. Professional printing, legal weight paper. Placed it on the coffee table and slid it toward me. I looked down at it, squinted, leaned closer. My signature was already there, pre-printed at the bottom of the page. Perfect replica of how I signed my name. The same signature Adrienne had practiced for 2 years in her notebook, refined and perfected and reproduced professionally. They weren't asking me to sign documents. They were asking me to sign documents that already had my forged signature on them. See, Mr. Mercer, Corbin pointed. Your name is right here. We just need your actual signature above the printed line to verify identity. Standard procedure. Standard procedure for forgery, maybe. Dad, just sign here and it's done, Adrienne said quietly. Then we can all relax and you won't have to think about any of this anymore. Simone moved quietly in the kitchen, rearranging bottles, playing her role, Waiting. Hayes was in his bedroom, with his finger on the send button of a text message that would alert federal authorities the moment fraud was attempted. And I sat there looking at a document with my forged signature already printed at the bottom, waiting for me to validate their crime with actual ink. Corbin tapped the signature line with his pen, expensive Mont Blanc, that probably cost more than I made in a month delivering mail. "Right here, Mr. Mercer. Just your signature, and we'll take care of everything else." My hand reached for the pen. It trembled. Not because I was afraid of signing, but because in about 90 seconds, Hayes was going to send the text message that would start everything we'd built for 3 weeks. I picked up the pen, and Adrienne actually smiled. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Mont Blanc, probably $300 worth of German engineering, designed to transfer away everything I owned. I held it over the signature line. Let my hand tremble. Not the practiced tremor I'd been performing for 3 weeks, but something deeper. Something that looked like a man whose body was betraying him. Adrienne leaned forward. Her hand covered mine, warm and gentle. "Dad, just sign here. It's okay. We talked about this, remember?" I stared at the document. At my name already printed there in perfect forgery. At the blank space above it waiting for my actual signature to validate their theft. 5 seconds passed. 10, 15. Corbin shifted in his chair. Adrienne squeezed my hand. "Dad." I lowered the pen to paper, wrote my name, or tried to. What came out was a disaster. Shaky loops that wandered off the line. Broken letters that looked like they'd been written during an earthquake. The I in Irving barely resembled a letter at all. The M in Mercer looked like a child's attempt at writing cursive for the first time. It looked nothing like my actual signature. Nothing like the practiced, steady hand I'd used on documents for 40 years. Corbin's professional smile tightened at the corners. "That's..." He paused. Recalibrated. "Let's try once more, Mr. Mercer. A bit clearer this time. Right on this line," he pointed. Patient. Professional. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes. This was taking longer than he'd planned. The senile old man was more senile than expected. "Let me tell you what it takes to write your own name badly on purpose. You have to forget every signature you've made for 65 years and become someone whose hand doesn't remember how to hold a pen. You have to make your muscles disobey. Make your brain pretend it can't connect thought to action. Make every letter look like a struggle you're losing." I looked up at Corbin. Blinked. "What am I signing again, son? Is this about the taxes? Your mother usually handles the taxes." Silence. Adrienne's face flickered. Not suspicion. Sadness. Like she was watching her father slip away in real time, and it hurt more than she'd expected. "Constance passed away, Mr. Mercer," Corbin said gently. 11 months ago. Remember?" I stared at him. Let confusion cross my face. "Oh, right, I forgot." Corbin carefully took the pen from my hand, closed it with a soft click, set it on the table. "Mr. Mercer, maybe the signature is too difficult right now. Let's try something simpler first." My phone vibrated in my flannel shirt pocket, subtle, just once. The kind of vibration that could be a text message or a calendar reminder or nothing important. I reached for it with shaking hands, pulled it out slowly like an old man checking the time, glanced at the screen. Hayes's message, "System online, camera recording. Simone has signal." 3 sentences, 19 words. I looked up slowly, surveying the room through the eyes of someone who didn't quite understand where he was. Corbin was opening his laptop, fully screen angled away from me while he typed something. Adrienne sat forward on the couch, hands clasped, watching me with patient frustration. Simone stood near the kitchen counter, arranging pill bottles with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Perfect nurse persona. No one looking at her would suspect she was a federal investigator recording every word Corbin spoke. 30 years as a federal postal worker taught me one thing: never lose the package, no matter what. I delivered through rain, snow, heat, through dogs and angry customers and routes that took 12 hours to finish. I'd never lost a package, and I wasn't going to lose this one. That text message, 3 sentences, 19 words, meant we'd gone from planning to execution, and there was no turning back now. Corbin looked up from his laptop. "Dad, do you remember your bank password?" "Corbin just wants to make sure your accounts are secure." Adrienne had started calling him by name when she spoke to me. Like I couldn't remember who he was. Like I needed constant reminders that this stranger was her fiancé. "Bank password," I repeated slowly. "Yes, for your Wells Fargo account. Just to verify everything's still accessible." I nodded vaguely. I think so." Constance wrote them down, somewhere. "That's okay," Corbin said quickly. "We can try to log in together. I'll help you. Make sure no one's been accessing your account without permission." The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was going to help me make sure no one was accessing my account without permission, while he tried to steal everything I owned. Simone moved quietly behind us. Set a glass of water on the side table near my chair. "Mr. Mercer, your medication is ready whenever you need it." I nodded at her. She nodded back. Our eyes met for exactly half a second. Message received. Everything was ready. Corbin set the pen down and opened his laptop, fully screen-angled toward me. The light from it reflected off his expensive watch, his perfectly pressed suit, his confidence that this was all going exactly as planned. "Mr. Mercer, let's just verify your bank account access instead. Simple login, confirm the balance is still there, then we can relax." He turned the laptop to face me, and right there on that screen was Hayes's perfect replica of my Wells Fargo banking portal, the trap baited and ready. Blue and yellow logo in the corner. Account login fields. Security questions. Even the small print at the bottom about protecting my information. It looked exactly like the real thing, because Hayes had built it to look exactly like the real thing. And when Corbin tried to transfer money from this account, every keystroke would route directly to Simone's federal recording system, with timestamps and documentation that would hold up in court. All I had to do was log in, and Corbin would walk right into it. "Do you remember your username, Mr. Mercer?" Corbin asked. His voice was patient, kind. The voice of someone helping a confused elderly man navigate technology he didn't understand. I looked at the screen, looked at my daughter sitting beside the man who planned to murder her, looked at Simone standing in my kitchen holding vitamin bottles disguised as medication, thought about Hayes in his bedroom, with his finger on systems I barely understood, building a trap sophisticated enough to catch a man who'd been planning this for 16 years. And I said, "Yes, I think I remember." My fingers hunted across Corbin's keyboard with practiced elderly slowness, one letter at a time, while every federal recording device Hayes had installed captured each keystroke. I typed my username, paused, looked at Corbin like I'd forgotten what came next. "The password, Mr. Mercer," he prompted gently. "Right below." "Oh, right. One letter at a time. Hunt and peck." The way someone who'd never really learned to type would do it. My actual typing speed, learned over 30 years of federal forms and delivery manifests, stayed buried under performance. The fake Wells Fargo portal accepted my credentials, screen loaded, and there it was, my actual account balance. My real transaction history from the past 6 months. All pulled from live banking data through whatever sophisticated system Hayes had built. It looked perfect, completely real, because Hayes had made it completely real. Corbin leaned forward, eyes scanning the screen. His professional smile widened. "Good, Mr. Mercer. Everything looks secure. Your balance is healthy." Adrienne glanced at the screen over his shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly. Dad's account balance is... That's a lot. I didn't realize you had that much liquid. Money Constance and I had saved for 40 years. Never spent. Never touched. Just built up slowly postal worker salary by postal worker salary because we lived simply and planned for emergencies. Now my daughter was looking at it like discovery, like opportunity. Now, Corbin said, guiding my hand to the mouse. Click here, account settings. That's it. We just need to add me as authorized manager for your protection. I clicked where he pointed. A drop-down menu appeared. Add authorized user. Below it, a field asking for name and relationship. Corbin reached over and typed his own name. Selected financial manager from the relationship drop-down. Just click authorize here, Mr. Mercer. Perfect. Now everything's properly managed. I moved the cursor slowly. Hovered over the button labeled authorize. Clicked. The screen refreshed. Authorization pending. Security verification required. What Corbin didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that authorization had just routed directly to Simone's federal evidence server. Complete digital fingerprint. Timestamp. IP address. Every piece of data needed to prove attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person. I need you to understand what was happening. In that moment, my daughter's fiancé had just given federal agents everything they needed to charge him with elder fraud, and he was smiling. Perfect, Corbin said, closing the laptop slightly. That's all we needed for now. Simple right now, your accounts are secure and professionally managed. He looked satisfied, confident. Like a man who'd just closed a deal he'd been planning for years. Adrienne's phone rang, loud, sharp. The default iPhone ringtone that cut through the room's careful tension. She pulled it from her purse, glanced at the screen. Her face went pale. Carson, she said, looking at her phone, then at Corbin sitting 18 inches away from her. But you're... Corbin's phone sat silent on the coffee table beside his laptop. Screen dark. No vibration, no ring. He looked at it, looked at Adrienne, confusion crossing his features. I'm not calling you, he said. Adrienne stared at her phone. The name on the screen clearly read Corbin Riddle. The number matched his. She answered it, cautious, afraid. Hello. I couldn't hear what the voice on the other end said. But I watched Adrienne's face transform. Watched her eyes go wide, then dart between the phone, the real Corbin sitting beside her, me in my chair, then back to the phone. Corbin, but your phone isn't... I don't understand. Whatever the voice said next made her hand shake. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'm doing it. She set her phone down, reached for the laptop, opened it back up. My fake Wells Fargo portal was still logged in, still showing my account balance. Her fingers moved faster than mine had. No performance, no pretense, just obedience. From Dad's account to the LLC account, right? She said into her phone, which was now on speaker. Corbin's voice came through crystal clear. 500,000. Do it now. Don't wait. But Corbin's mouth wasn't moving. He sat there frozen, watching his fiancée take orders from his own voice, while his actual phone lay silent on the table. That phone call, Corbin's voice coming from Adrienne's phone, while Corbin sat silent 3 feet away, lasted exactly 14 seconds and destroyed 2 lives. Adrienne navigated through the fake portal, found transfer funds, entered the amount $500,000, selected the LLC account Corbin had set up, typed in security codes, clicked confirm transfer. Simone stood in the kitchen doorway, watch camera, positioned perfectly to capture the entire transaction. Every click, every keystroke, every word of impossible phone conversation. The screen loaded. Processing. Then, transaction complete. $500,000 transferred to Riddle Mercer Property Management, LLC. Except, it wasn't complete. The money hadn't moved. The transaction had failed on the back end, routed instead to federal evidence servers with complete documentation of attempted wire fraud. But Adrienne didn't know that. She stared at the confirmation screen, then at her phone, which had gone silent. Call ended. Then at Corbin, whose face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching horror, because he was finally understanding. His phone hadn't rung. He hadn't called Adrienne. Someone else had called her, using his voice, his number, giving her orders to execute a transfer while federal recording equipment captured everything. Simone stepped forward from the kitchen, not like a nurse anymore, like someone with authority. She placed her hand gently on Adrienne's shoulder. "Ms. Mercer," she said quietly, her voice suddenly carrying federal authority instead of nurse deference. "I need you to come with me." Adrienne looked up at her. "What? You just executed a fraudulent wire transfer from your father's account. I need you to come with me right now." "No, Corbin told me to." His phone. Simone's hand stayed on Adrienne's shoulder, gentle but firm. "Stand up, please." Adrienne stood, mechanical, confused. Looking between Simone, Corbin, me, the laptop showing the completed transfer that shouldn't have been possible. Corbin's face had drained of all color. He was looking at his phone, picking it up, checking his call history. Nothing. No outgoing call. No record of the conversation Adrienne had just had with his voice. That's when Corbin finally understood. Corbin's face drained from red to ash gray in the span of 3 heartbeats. He stared at his phone, checked the call history again, scrolled through recent calls, outgoing calls, any calls. Nothing. No record of the conversation Adrienne had just had with his voice. His hands started shaking. He looked at Adrienne standing beside Simone, at me sitting in my chair, at his laptop still open on the coffee table. Reached for it. The screen had changed. No more fake Wells Fargo portal. No more account balances or transfer confirmations. Just a blue screen with white text, "Federal Forensic Lock. Device seized under 18 U.S.C. 1343, wire fraud. Contact FBI Atlanta Field Office." And at the bottom, in smaller text, "Lock initiated April 15, 2023, 14:47 Eastern Standard Time." 6 days ago. The federal government had been monitoring him for a full week before he walked into my house this morning. "No," Corbin whispered. "No, that's not." He stood up fast, looked out the window. Simone's car was parked in my driveway. Not the Honda she'd been driving when she arrived as my nurse. A black SUV with government plates and a small antenna on the roof. Corbin turned back to me. I looked at him. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just met his eyes steadily while his world collapsed around him. "You," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You were never senile," I said quietly. "No. You ever watch someone's world collapse in real time? It's quieter than you'd think. No screaming. No dramatic denials. Just a man standing in a living room understanding slowly, like ice melting, that every single thing he'd planned for 16 years had just been turned against him. The medical assessment," Corbin said. "The Alzheimer's diagnosis, the cognitive testing." "Fabricated," Simone said from behind him. "I'm not a nurse, Mr. Riddle. I'm a federal economic investigator. And you've been under surveillance since April 15th. Corbin's legs seemed to stop working. He sat back down. Not gracefully. Just dropped into the chair like someone had cut his strings. "The phone call," he said. "My voice. That was digital audio synthesis," Simone said. Your voice cloned from recordings we have of you explaining the LLC structure to Ms. Mercer. Used to induce her to execute a fraudulent transfer on camera while I recorded everything. Simone's hand was still on Adrienne's shoulder. Gentle but firm. "Mr. Riddle, I need you to stay seated while I read you your rights." She did, Miranda warnings in a calm, professional voice, while Corbin sat frozen and Adrienne stood shaking, and I watched from my chair. When Simone finished, she made a call, spoke quietly, gave my address. 2 minutes later, another SUV pulled into my driveway. 2 men in dark suits. Federal agents who'd been waiting somewhere close by for exactly this moment. They led Corbin out. He didn't fight, didn't argue, just walked between them like a man in a dream, hands already cuffed behind his back. The door closed. Adrienne stood in the middle of my living room, staring at nothing. Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor. Not crying, not speaking. Just sitting there with her back against the couch, hands in her lap, face blank. I stood up from my chair, moved slowly, sat down on the floor across from her back, against Constance's reading chair. We sat there for a long moment. Father and daughter on opposite sides of my living room floor. The carpet between us might as well have been an ocean. "How long have you known?" Adrienne asked finally. Her voice was small, hollow. 3 weeks, I said. "Since Vernon told me Corbin looked familiar. Since I found your practice notebook in your old bedroom." Her eyes closed. "The signatures, 2 years' worth, started when your mother was still alive." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I looked at my daughter, 38 years old, sitting on my floor, broken. "You've been afraid of being poor since Derek left you," I said quietly. "I know that. I've watched you carry that fear for 2 years." I remembered her at 9 years old, after Derek cleaned out their accounts and disappeared. Adrienne crying in my truck while I drove her and her daughter to my house because she had nowhere else to go. Asking me, "Dad, will we be okay? Will we have enough money?" And me promising, "I'll never let you be afraid of being poor. Never." Corbin knew about that fear, I continued. He found you because of it, used it, manipulated you into helping him steal from me because he knew you were desperate enough and scared enough to believe him when he promised you'd never be poor again. Adrienne's hands were shaking. He said we'd be partners, that the property would be ours, that we'd sell it and move to Florida and start over. He lied, I said. He put money down on Florida property in your name, money you don't have access to. Set it up so when you died in an accident he was planning he'd inherit everything as your fiancé. Her face went white. What? Corbin Riddle is the son of Harlan Doss, the man I testified against in 2007. This was never about money, Adrienne. This was about revenge. And you were just a tool he planned to use and discard. She stared at me, processing, understanding. He was going to kill me, she whispered. Yes. Silence. Then you saved my life. I tried to save your life and stop you from committing federal crimes. I succeeded at one, failed at the other. Simone had moved to the kitchen, giving us space, but I knew she was still recording, still documenting. Adrienne looked at me, really looked. You're not senile. You were never confused. All of it, the trembling hands forgetting Corbin's name, asking the same questions that was performance. Yes. You trapped us. I trapped him. You walked into it with him. Her voice broke. Dad, will you forgive me? I looked at my daughter sitting on the floor and didn't answer immediately. The front door opened before I could answer her. Hayes stood in the doorway, breathing hard, like he'd been running. His eyes found Adrienne sitting on the floor, then moved to me sitting across from her, then to Simone standing in the kitchen. He walked to me, placed his hand on my shoulder. Dad, he said quietly, it's done. Federation is handling it. Adrienne's head snapped up. She looked at her brother. Really looked. You, she said. Her voice was hollow. You knew. Yes. From the beginning. From 2 weeks before Dad called me. I saw you photographing Mom's will on your phone. Started investigating on my own. Adrienne's face crumpled. Hayes, I didn't know what Corbin was. But I know, Hayes said. His voice was gentle, sad. I know you didn't know about Harlan Doss or the murder plan or any of it. But you were still stealing from Dad. You were still forging signatures. You were still committing federal crimes. You helped trap me, she whispered. Your own sister. I helped trap Corbin. You walked into it with him. Hayes knelt down so he was eye level with her. Adrienne, he was going to kill you. After you helped him steal everything, he was going to stage an accident and inherit it all as your fiancé. Dad saving you from that meant exposing what you'd done. There was no way to do one without the other. She looked at me. How long have you two been planning this together? 3 weeks, I said. Since the day you first asked me to sign documents. Hayes and I coordinated from that first phone call. Before the fake medical assessment. Before Simone arrived. Before anything. There's a particular kind of pain when your children break each other's hearts, and you're the reason why. I watched Adrienne look between her brother and me. Watched her understand that her entire family had been working together to stop her. To save her. To trap her. All three at the same time. Why? She asked Hayes. Why help him do this to me? Hayes's voice was quiet. Because Dad can't do it alone. And because you're my sister, too. Because watching you go to prison for conspiracy and fraud is better than watching you die in a staged car accident in Florida and never knowing the truth. Adrienne closed her eyes. Simone stepped forward from the kitchen. Ms. Mercer, I need you to come with me now. Adrienne opened her eyes, looked at Simone, then at Hayes, then at me. Dad, she said. Her voice broke. I love you. I opened my mouth. No words came out. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're still with me, comment A, if I should have forgiven her in that moment, or B, if silence was right. Add one reason why. Please note what follows includes recreated details for narrative depth. The lesson is what matters. Adrienne stood slowly. Simone stayed close beside her, professional and gentle at the same time. My daughter looked at me one last time. Waiting. Hoping. I still couldn't speak. The distance from the couch to the front door is maybe 15 feet. It felt like miles. Adrienne walked it alone. Simone beside her. Hayes still kneeling on the floor where Adrienne had been sitting. Me still sitting against Constance's reading chair, silent. At the door, Adrienne paused, turned back. And Dad, I'm sorry. For all of it, I'm so sorry. I nodded. That was all I could manage. A nod. She walked out. The door closed. Hayes stood up. Moved to the window. I followed. We stood there together, father and son, watching through the glass as Simone guided Adrienne down the porch steps toward the unmarked government SUV parked in my driveway. Adrienne got in the back seat. Simone closed the door, walked around to the driver's side. Before the car pulled away, Adrienne turned in her seat, looked back at the cabin. At the window where Hayes and I stood, she couldn't see us through the glare, but she looked anyway, searching for an answer I still hadn't given. Had I forgiven her? Did I forgive her? Could I forgive her? I didn't know. She'd tried to steal everything Constance left behind. Had practiced forging our signatures for 2 years. Had walked into my house with documents designed to transfer away land that had been in Constance's family for 3 generations. But she'd also been manipulated by a man who planned to murder her. Been used as a weapon in a 16-year revenge plot she knew nothing about. been so afraid of poverty that she'd convinced herself theft was survival. Which truth mattered more? The car pulled away. Adrienne's face disappeared behind tinted windows. The SUV turned onto the main road and vanished behind the pines. Hayes put his hand on my shoulder again. "You did the right thing, Dad." "Did I?" "You saved her life. You stopped Corbin. You protected what Mom left for Ivy." "Yes. You did the right thing." I looked at my son, 36 years old, brilliant, strategic, loyal enough to help his father trap his sister because it was the only way to save her. She asked if I'd forgive her. I said quietly, "I know." I didn't answer. "I know. What do I do with that?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You have time to figure it out. She's not gone forever. Just gone for now." I nodded. We stood at that window for another 5 minutes, looking at the empty driveway. The porch steps Adrienne had walked down. The road that had taken her away. Somewhere in Atlanta, Corbin Riddle was sitting in a federal holding cell, understanding finally that his 16-year plan for revenge had destroyed him instead of me. Somewhere else in Atlanta, my daughter was sitting in another room, understanding that her family had spent 3 weeks building a trap to save her from a man she thought loved her. And I was standing in my living room, watching an empty driveway, unable to answer the simplest question a daughter can ask her father. The next 48 hours would determine whether Adrienne and I ever spoke again. Hayes poured 3 cups of coffee at the kitchen table like we were about to discuss a mortgage, not a murder. The police cruiser carrying Adrienne had disappeared down the driveway 20 minutes ago, but I could still see her face pressed against the rear window, searching for an answer I hadn't given. Sunday afternoon, sunlight filled my kitchen with a warmth that felt obscene given what we were about to discuss. "Simone's running late," Hayes said, checking his phone. She wanted to make sure Adrienne's processing went smoothly at the station. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, grateful for something tangible to hold. My son had orchestrated this entire operation with Simone Hoffman, the forensic accountant, who'd turned private investigator for my case. The woman who'd built the evidence fortress that trapped Corbin. "When did you two start working together?" I asked. Hayes met my eyes with that steady gaze he'd inherited from his mother. 3 weeks after you called me about the property transfer. I knew you'd need more than just legal advice to stop this, Dad. I knew you'd need proof." The front door opened before I could respond. Simone Hoffman entered with her leather messenger bag and that purposeful stride I'd come to recognize. At 44, she moved through the world like someone who'd learned to trust only what she could verify. "Your daughter's been processed," Simone said, sitting at the table. "She's cooperating fully. Gave a complete statement about Corbin's role in the forgery scheme, but she still forged my signature," I said quietly. Simone's expression softened fractionally. "Yes, she did." Hayes slid the 3rd cup of coffee toward her. The gesture had a practiced quality that made me wonder how many strategy sessions they'd held without me. How many late-night calls had mapped out this intervention while I'd been sleeping oblivious. "There's something else you need to know," Simone said. "Something we discovered in the final days of surveillance after we'd already locked down the forgery evidence." The way she said it made my chest tighten. "What?" Simone opened her messenger bag and withdrew a slim folder. Corbin had a second plan, a contingency that would activate after the property transfer completed. She laid out 3 pages covered in her precise handwriting. Call logs, financial transfers, text message timestamps. My eyes struggled to make sense of the pattern until Simone's next words crystallized everything into horrible clarity. "When Corbin planned to murder Adrienne," she said. "Make it look like an accident. Collect the property value as her widower before you could challenge the transfer in court." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I gripped the table-edge coffee, forgotten. The life insurance policy he took out on her 3 months ago. Simone continued. $500,000. The beach house rental in Destin he booked for late May, isolated location, steep cliff access. The text messages to his associate in Florida discussing resolving the loose end after the property sale closed. Hayes reached across the table, his hand covering mine. We stopped it, Dad. She's safe. But the word loose end kept echoing in my skull. My daughter. The baby I'd rocked through nightmares and walked to her first day of school. Corbin had reduced her to a problem requiring permanent solution. Does she know? I asked. Not yet, Simone said. The prosecutor will inform her during the plea negotiations. It'll strengthen the case against Corbin and likely reduce her exposure. I stood abruptly, chair scraping against tile. Walked to the window overlooking the 47 acres Adrian had tried to steal. The land looked peaceful in the afternoon light, innocent of the violence it had nearly caused. I need to see her, I said. Hayes and Simone exchanged glances. The prosecutor arranged a supervised meeting, Hayes said carefully. Tonight at 6:45. Parking lot at the county facility? 10 minutes? 4 hours later, I stood beside Hayes's Mercedes in the gathering twilight, watching Adrian walk toward me, flanked by 2 deputies. She wore civilian clothes now, but the haunted look in her eyes belonged to someone who'd seen her entire world dismantle in 72 hours. The deputies stopped 15 feet back, giving us the illusion of privacy. Daddy, Adrian said, and her voice cracked on the word. I'm so sorry. For everything. For betraying you, for choosing him over family, for being stupid enough to think. No need to apologize to me, I said quietly. The words came from somewhere deep and certain. Apologize to Ivy. Adrian's face crumpled. What? Chikui, your daughter spent 6 weeks watching her mother lie to her grandfather, I said. Watching you choose a con artist over your own father. She's 11 years old, Adrian. Old enough to understand betrayal, but not old enough to process why her mother would commit it. Tears streamed down Adrian's face. I thought I was building her future. The money from the property, it would have secured her education, her. You were stealing from her grandfather to fund your boyfriend's murder plan, I said, and watched her flinch. Hayes told me what Simone found, the insurance policy, the beach house, the text messages. Adrian's legs seemed to give out. One deputy moved forward instinctively, but she caught herself against the building wall. He was going to kill me. After the property transfer cleared, I confirmed. You weren't his partner, sweetheart. You were his access point and his liability. She slid down the wall until she sat on the pavement, arms wrapped around her knees like a child. I wanted to go to her. Every parental instinct screamed to comfort my daughter in her devastation. But I remained standing 15 feet away because some lessons require distance to land. I'll write to Ivy, Adrian whispered. Every day. I'll explain. I'll apologize. You'll spend the next 6 months proving you've changed. I interrupted gently. Not with words. With choices. The prosecutor said you're cooperating. She nodded, wiping her face. Everything. Every detail Corbin told me, every document, every conversation. Then keep cooperating, I said. Take the plea deal. Serve your time. Get counseling. Figure out why you were vulnerable to someone like him. One deputy checked his watch and cleared his throat. Our 10 minutes were ending. Daddy, Adrian said as they helped her to her feet. Will you tell Ivy I love her? I'll bring her to visit you, I said. When you're ready. When you've done the work. They led her back toward the facility entrance. She looked back once, and I raised my hand in something between a wave and a benediction. The door closed behind her with a sound like finality. I stood alone in the parking lot as darkness settled over Lumpkin County, feeling the full weight of what I'd preserved and what I'd lost. Hayes appeared beside me and placed his hand on my shoulder, solid and steady and present. Conrad Lancaster's office smelled like old leather and decisions made decades ago. Hayes had driven us here from the county facility parking lot without speaking, and now we sat across from the man who'd handled Constance's estate. Conrad Lancaster, 72, had been Constance's attorney for 30 years and kept secrets like other men kept stamps. I received a call from the prosecutor's office, Conrad said, adjusting his reading glasses, regarding the forgery attempt on your Georgia property. Hayes and I exchanged glances. The office felt too warm, too close. Your wife left specific instructions. Conrad continued, rising from his desk. He moved to a wall safe I'd never noticed before, hidden behind a framed photograph of the Blue Ridge Mountains. She told me to open this only under certain circumstances. The safe's tumblers clicked in the quiet room. Conrad withdrew a sealed manila envelope, its edges yellowed with age. The postmark read, March 2016, 3 years before Constance died. What is that? I asked. Conrad broke the seal and unfolded several pages of legal stationery. A will. The real one. My chest tightened. We executed Constance's will in 2019. You were there. Hatstu. That will covered her personal effects and financial accounts, Conrad said carefully. This one addresses the Georgia property specifically. She filed it separately with instructions that it supersede any later documents regarding the 47 acres. Hayes leaned forward, his voice tight. Why would she do that? Conrad's eyes met mine over his reading glasses. Your wife filed this will 3 years before she passed. She never told you. I shook my head, unable to speak. Conrad began reading aloud. I, Constance Elaine Mercer, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my inherited Georgia property, including all 47 acres, the cabin structure, and all improvements thereon, to my granddaughter, Ivy Elizabeth Mercer. The words hung in the air like smoke. She left it to Ivy, I whispered. Not Adrienne. Not Adrienne, Conrad confirmed. The will grants you residency and full management rights until Ivy reaches age 25, at which point legal ownership transfers to her name. Hayes receives the financial assets, roughly $80,000 in savings and bonds. Hayes's face had gone pale. Mom left the entire property to Ivy. She cut Adrienne out completely. 3 years before she died. I said, the timeline crystallizing. Before Adrienne even met Corbin, Conrad set the pages down on the dark wood table. Your wife was very specific about the conditions. If Adrienne attempted to claim the property, this will would activate. If she proved herself trustworthy, your wife left instructions for a different distribution after your death. On a test, Hayes said quietly. Mom was testing her. I thought about Adrienne in the parking lot 2 hours ago, asking if I'd tell Ivy she loved her. Thought about Constance lying in our bed the last year of her life, knowing she'd set this trap for her own daughter. Did she say why I'm Constance? I asked. Conrad turned to the final page. She included a handwritten passage. Would you like me to read it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Sometimes the dead protect us better than the living ever could. Constance had seen something in Adrienne that I'd been too close to notice. Some fracture that time would widen into the chasm that swallowed our family whole. Conrad's voice softened as he read, My daughter has always been drawn to easy answers and dangerous men. I have watched her make choices that break my heart. I hope I am wrong. I hope that by the time Irving reads this, Adrienne has proven me wrong about everything. But if she has done wrong to this family, if she has chosen greed over love, if she has betrayed the people who would die for her, then use this document not to punish her, but to protect Ivy. My granddaughter deserves a foundation that cannot be stolen or forged or sold by someone who mistakes manipulation for love. Not to punish, to protect. The last three words echoed in the silence. Mom knew, Hayes said, his voice breaking. She knew about her daughter. No. I said, the truth settling over me like cold water. She knew what Adrienne already was. I thought about every conversation I'd had with Constance in those final months. The way she'd asked about Adrienne's new boyfriend with that careful neutrality. The way she'd made me promise to watch over Ivy no matter what happened. The way she'd smiled sadly when I assured her Adrienne was finally getting her life together. You ever realize someone knew you better than you knew yourself? That's what a mother's love looks like. Constance had loved Adrienne enough to hope she'd change, and loved Ivy enough to prepare for the probability she wouldn't. So the forgery attempt, Conrad said, gathering the pages. It was worthless from the start. Adrienne couldn't transfer property she never had the right to inherit. She didn't know, Hayes said. All this time she thought she was stealing Dad's inheritance. She didn't know it was never his to begin with. I sat back in my chair, feeling the full weight of Constance's foresight. My wife had anticipated this exact scenario years before Corbin Riddle entered our lives. Had built a legal fortress around our granddaughter while leaving Adrienne enough rope to hang herself with her own choices. There's one more thing, Conrad said quietly. He turned the final page to show us the handwriting Constance's distinctive script, unchanged by illness or time. She added this note in her own hand the day she filed the will. The words were simple, devastating. I pray Irving never has to read this, but if he does, I hope he understands. Some love looks like inheritance. Some love looks like protection. Sometimes they're the same thing. Hayes bowed his head to the dark wood table, shoulders trembling. I reached across and placed my hand on his back, feeling his grief pulse through the cotton of his shirt. My son was mourning his mother all over again, mourning the burden she'd carried alone, the terrible prescience that had made her weaponize her own estate against her daughter. Between us, Constance's will lay open pages filled with legal language and love rendered in clauses and conditions. She'd seen the future we couldn't imagine, and built a shield for the grandchild who'd need it most. I sat in silence with my hand on Hayes's back, breathing in the smell of old leather and decades-old decisions, and felt my wife's presence in that quiet room. She'd been dead 4 years, but she was protecting Ivy still. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept holding the cup anyway. Hayes had driven me home from Conrad's office and asked if I wanted company. I'd told him no. Now I sat alone on the cabin patio in the April darkness, staring at land that stretched beneath a thin moon. The property was still there, still belonged to the family, would belong to Ivy when she turned 25. I didn't know how many years Adrienne would serve. Didn't know if Ivy understood yet what her grandmother had done. But I knew one thing with certainty that settled in my chest like a stone today. I'd kept my promise to Constance. The patio boards creaked as I shifted in the Adirondack chair Constance and I had bought at a yard sale in 1998. The chair was older than Ivy, older than Adrienne's first marriage, older than most of the mistakes that had led us to this moment. I thought about Constance sitting in Conrad's office in March 2016, signing a will she hoped I'd never see. Imagined her hands steady on the pen, her mind clear about what she needed to protect. Had she cried afterward? Had she driven home and made dinner and kissed me hello without mentioning that she'd just legally disinherited our daughter? I kept my promise, Constance, I whispered to the darkness. The land didn't answer. The night stayed quiet except for the distant call of a whippoorwill and the rustle of wind through pine trees. The land stays with Ivy. My granddaughter was 11 years old, sleeping at her other grandfather's house in Gainesville, oblivious that she'd inherited Georgia real estate. oblivious that her mother sat in a county jail cell, oblivious that her grandmother had seen this moment coming years before Ivy learned to ride a bike. I lifted the cold coffee to my lips and drank anyway. Tasted like regret and caffeine and the metal tang of well water filtered through pipes Constance and I had installed ourselves. I don't know if that makes me a good father or a terrible one, I said. The whippoorwill called again. Somewhere in the valley below, a dog barked. The land absorbed my words without judgment, the same way it had absorbed 40 years of Mercer family history, births and deaths, weddings and funerals, promises kept and broken. I'd protected my granddaughter's inheritance. I'd exposed my daughter's betrayal. I'd stood in a parking lot and told Adrian to apologize to Ivy instead of me. I'd sat in Conrad's office and learned that my wife had known exactly what Adrian would become. The April air smelled like fresh earth and possibility. Spring in the mountains meant new growth, but it also meant mud season, everything beautiful and ruined at the same time. Hayes had asked if I felt good about what we'd done. I hadn't answered him then. Sitting alone with cold coffee and moonlight, I still didn't have an answer that fit in words. You want to know what victory feels like when it costs you your daughter exactly like this? Cold coffee, empty patio, land protected, family shattered. 8 months later, I stood in the Lumpkin County Courthouse yard in December sunshine that barely warmed my coat. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Simone had testified about the forensic evidence. Hayes had testified about discovering the forgery. I had testified about the phone call from Conrad and the moment I'd realized my daughter was stealing from me to fund her boyfriend's schemes. Adrienne had testified, too voice small and broken, about how Corbin had manipulated her. About the life insurance policy she'd never known existed. About the beach house rental in Destin she'd thought was a romantic getaway until the prosecutor showed her the text messages planning her murder. The jury had deliberated for 6 hours. Judge Margaret Thornhill, 68 and 23 years on the bench, had read the verdicts with no inflection in her voice. Corbin Riddle guilty on all counts. Wire fraud conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and theft by deception. Sentenced 12 years federal prison, no parole eligibility for 8 years. Corbin hadn't reacted, just sat at the defense table like a man already calculating his appeal. Adrian Mercer, guilty of forgery and conspiracy to commit theft. The court acknowledges the defendant's cooperation with prosecutors, her status as a victim in Mr. Riddle's murder plot, and the manipulation she endured. Sentence 3 years incarceration followed by 5 years supervised probation. I'd heard someone crying behind me. Might have been Adrian's mother-in-law. Might have been a stranger who'd followed the case in the papers. The gavel had come down with a sound like a door closing. Now I stood in the courthouse yard, while people filed past, lawyers carrying briefcases, reporters checking phones, families relieved their own cases were over. The December air smelled like car exhaust and someone's cigarette smoke drifting from the parking lot. December sunshine is thin and apologetic, like justice that comes too late to feel like winning. Hayes appeared beside me, Conrad Lancaster a few steps behind. My son had aged in the 8 months since we'd sat in Conrad's office reading Constance's will. Fine lines had appeared around his eyes. Gray streaked his temples that hadn't been there in April. Dad, Hayes said quietly. How do you feel? I watched a mother hold her toddler's hand as they navigated the courthouse steps. Watched the prosecutor shake hands with Simone near the entrance. Watched the December wind scatter dead leaves across the lawn that would green again in spring. Adrienne would serve her time. Corbin would rot in federal prison. Ivy would inherit when she turned 25. The family Constance and I had built was fractured beyond anything I'd imagined possible on our wedding day 43 years ago. But the land was protected. The inheritance was secure. My granddaughter would have a foundation Adrian couldn't steal and Corbin couldn't corrupt. I buttoned my coat against the December chill and met my son's eyes. Actually, said, the word felt insufficient but honest. But peaceful. Hayes nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. Like he felt the same complicated grief, the ache of doing the right thing at terrible cost. We stood together in the courthouse yard. As the December afternoon tilted toward evening, two men who'd saved a family legacy by breaking a family apart. Hayes kept both hands on the wheel for the first 5 miles before he finally spoke. We'd left the courthouse yard in silence, my son guiding me toward his truck with a hand on my elbow, like I was an old man who might stumble. Maybe I was. The December landscape blurred past bare trees, empty field signs for towns I'd driven through 1,000 times. Hayes's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Dad," he said finally, "there's something I need to tell you." I watched a hawk circle above a fallow field. "All right. I saw her photographing the will 2 weeks before you called me." The words took a moment to land. I turned to look at my son's profile, jaw, tight eyes fixed on the road. "What?" "I came by the cabin to borrow your post hole digger," Hayes said. "You were in town. I let myself in through the back door." He swallowed hard. "Adrienne was in your bedroom. She had Constance's will spread across your desk, photographing every page with her phone." My chest felt tight. 2 weeks before I called you about the property transfer." "Yeah, you didn't tell me." Hayes's hands flexed on the wheel. "I confronted her. She made up some story about needing a copy for her own records, said you'd told her she could. I knew it was bullshit, but I couldn't prove it. So I started my own investigation." I stared at him. "What kind of investigation?" "Stuctiticum. Called in a favor from a guy I knew in Atlanta who does corporate security. Had him run Corbin's financials, social media, everything. Found the Florida transaction within 3 days. Found the life insurance policy application. Found text messages between Corbin and some associate about closing the deal after the property transferred. The hawk had disappeared. The road stretched empty ahead. You knew," I said quietly. "You knew what they were planning, and you didn't tell me." I didn't have proof yet," Hayes said. "And I was afraid of what you'd do if I told you your daughter was stealing from you. Afraid you'd confront her, tip them off, give them time to cover their tracks." He glanced at me, eyes red-rimmed. "I protected you in the way I know how." The phrase hung between us. Protected you. The same words Constance had written in her will. "Like your mother," I said. Hayes nodded once, sharp and definitive. A tear tracked down his cheek, but his hands stayed steady on the wheel. Some sons protect their fathers with silence. Hayes protected me the way his mother would have, with strategy, with foresight, with a willingness to carry burdens alone so I wouldn't have to. "When did you contact Simone?" I asked. "The day after I found the Florida deposit. I needed someone who could build an evidence case that would hold up in court. Someone who could track them without them knowing." "You orchestrated the entire investigation." "We did," Hayes corrected quietly. "You, me, Simone. We protected Ivy together." I reached across and placed my hand on my son's shoulder. Felt the tension vibrating through him like a wire pulled too tight. "Thank you," I said. Hayes didn't answer. Just drove us home through the December afternoon while the weight of what we'd done, what we'd saved, what we'd lost settled between us like a passenger we'd be carrying for the rest of our lives. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Adrienne in a Georgia State Prison visiting room, a glass partition separating us. She looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, wearing a gray prison uniform that washed out her complexion. But her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. Focused. Present. We picked up the phones simultaneously. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, sweetheart." Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, just heavy with everything we couldn't say through bulletproof glass in a room monitored by corrections officers. "How's Hayes?" she asked. "He's good, working. He came by for dinner last Sunday." And Ivy. My granddaughter's name seemed to hurt her to say. I watched Adrian's hand tighten on the phone receiver. She's doing well, I said carefully. Adrian's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Dad, do you have a picture of Ivy? I pulled out my wallet and pressed a photo against the glass. Ivy standing in the field behind the cabin, 12 years old, now wearing her grandmother's old work jacket and grinning at the camera. Dirt on her cheeks. Joy in her eyes. Adrienne pressed her palm against the glass, where the photo was like she could touch her daughter through the barrier. She's doing well. Living with me, I said. Glass between us, 3 years between now and when she gets out, 47 acres waiting for Ivy. Does she ask about me? Adrienne whispered. I could have lied. Could have said no to spare her. But we were done with lies. Every day, I said. I tell her you made mistakes, but you're working to fix them. That you love her more than anything. Adrienne's tears fell, then silent and steady. Do you tell her the truth about what I tried to do? I tell her you got involved with a bad man who manipulated you. That you're serving time for forgery. When she's older, when she can understand, I'll tell her the rest. About the will, about Constance leaving everything to her. When she's ready. Adrienne wiped her face with her sleeve. Thank you, Dad. The words were simple, but carried the weight of everything: gratitude for raising Ivy, for not poisoning her against her mother, for showing up at this prison visiting room when I could have stayed home and let her serve her time alone. Why, I'm still angry, I said quietly. But you're still my daughter. Adrienne nodded, pressing her hand against the glass again. I raised my own hand and matched it to hers, separated by partition and choices and consequences, but connected still. We sat like that for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing important: the weather, the food, the books she was reading. The visit ended too soon and lasted forever. I drove home through January twilight, the photo of Ivy back in my wallet, my hand still remembering the ghost pressure of Adrienne's palm through glass. The cabin came into view as I turned up the gravel drive. Ivy Mercer sat on the porch steps, 12 years old, with her grandmother Constance's dark eyes and her grandfather's stubborn chin. She held a fistful of dark Georgia earth in both hands, dirt streaked across her jeans. She looked up and grinned. Grandpa, I found worms. Hayes's truck showed up with 2 suitcases and the word temporarily, but nobody believed it. 3 days after I'd found Ivy on the porch examining worms, my son knocked on the cabin door at 7 in the morning with luggage and a careful explanation about helping out until things settled. The word temporarily disappeared after the first week. Now, a month into January, the cabin held 3 generations of Mercers again. Different configuration than before. Smaller. But the kitchen table was full at dinner time, and that counted for something. Uncle Hayes, do you know how to braid hair? Ivy asked one evening, twisting in her chair to look at Hayes washing dishes at the sink. Hayes glanced at me, eyebrows raised. I know how to braid rope. She's close enough, Ivy said with 12-year-old confidence. She pulled her hair over one shoulder and waited. I watched Hayes dry his hands and attempt a braid that looked more like a sailor's knot than anything Constance would have approved. Ivy giggled. Hayes tried again, his large hands gentle and uncertain on his niece's dark hair. The scene was so ordinary it hurt. Kitchen smelling like the meatloaf I'd made from Constance's recipe. Dishes draining on the rack. Winter darkness pressed against the windows. Ivy's homework spread across the table next to my coffee cup. 30 years ago, this same kitchen had held Constance and me, baby Hayes, in a high chair, Adrienne chasing the cat under the table. More people then. More noise, more complicated. There, Hayes said, stepping back. The braid was crooked, but held. How's that? Ivy touched it carefully. Perfect. Hayes met my eyes over her head. Something passed between us, acknowledgement of the absence that made this moment possible. Adrian should have been here braiding her daughter's hair, should have been asking about homework and making dinner and living the ordinary life she'd gambled away for a con artist's promises. But she wasn't here, so we were. "I'm staying as long as you need me, Dad," Hayes said quietly later that night after Ivy had gone to bed. I looked at my son standing in the kitchen doorway, 36 years old, and tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I need you," I said. Hayes nodded. No more talk of temporarily. No more pretending this arrangement had an expiration date. The broken family had reconfigured into something new, 3 generations under one roof, filling the spaces Adrian and Constance had left behind. Smaller family, but still family. You want to know what healing looks like? It's 3 mismatched people at a dinner table passing salt. It's crooked braids and meatloaf recipes and homework spread across scarred wood. It's filling the silence with small talk instead of grief. Saturday morning came cold and bright. I woke Ivy before dawn. "Where are we going?" she asked, pulling on her boots in the mudroom. "I want to show you something." We walked the land as the sun climbed over the pine ridge. I led Ivy along the property line, showing her the corner stakes Hayes and I had reset last fall. Pointed out the cabin site where Constance's grandfather had built the first structure in 1924. "Your great-great-grandfather cleared this field by hand," I said, gesturing at the open meadow behind the cabin. "Took him 3 years. Your great-great-grandmother planted apple trees along that fence line. Most of them are gone now, but 2 are still standing." Ivy walked beside me, hands shoved in her jacket pockets, breath misting in the January air. She listened with an intensity that reminded me of Constance, the way my wife had absorbed information and held it like treasure. "This land will be yours later," I said. "Your grandmother Constance wanted it that way." Ivy stopped walking. "Mine, when you turn 25. Until then, I manage it. Make sure it stays healthy. Make sure the taxes get paid. Make sure it's ready for you." She looked out across the meadow, processing. Why didn't she give it to my mom? The question I'd known was coming. I knelt in the cold grass, so we were eye level. "Because your grandmother loved your mother very much," I said carefully. "But she also knew your mother sometimes made choices that weren't good for her. Your grandmother wanted to make sure this land reached you, someone who would love it properly and take care of it. Land doesn't care who owns it on paper, but it knows who loves it. I'd learned that from Constance, who'd inherited this property from a grandmother she barely remembered and spent 40 years tending it like a living thing. My mom tried to steal it," Ivy said quietly. "It wasn't a question. I'd told her a simplified version weeks ago. Told her Adrian had made bad choices with a bad man, that she was in prison learning to make better ones. But Ivy was 12 and smart, and had clearly filled in the gaps herself. "Yes," I said. "She tried to take it, but we stopped her. And now it's protected for you." Ivy looked down at the ground between us. Dark Georgia soil rich with pine needles and 40 years of Constance's composting. She bent and scooped up a handful of earth, letting it crumble through her fingers. "Grandma Constance left this for me." She did. 'Cause she knew I'd take care of it. Because she hoped you would. Because she trusted that when you were old enough to understand what it meant, you'd want to protect it the way she did. Ivy let the last of the soil fall from her palm. Her eyes, Constance's dark eyes, met mine with a seriousness that belonged to someone much older. "I won't sell it, Grandpa," she said. "I promise." The words hit me like a physical blow. My vision blurred. I felt moisture on my cheeks and realized I was crying, really crying, not the careful, private grief I'd allowed myself since Constance died, but open sobbing in front of my 12-year-old granddaughter. "I promise," Ivy said again, and wrapped her thin arms around my neck. I held her in the January meadow, while tears I'd been holding for 4 years finally broke free. Cried for Constance, who'd never see her granddaughter keep this promise. Cried for Adrian, who'd lost the chance to stand here and make it herself. Cried for the family we'd been and the family we'd become. Ivy didn't say anything, just held on tight while her grandfather fell apart under the cold Georgia sky. When I finally pulled myself together, she took my hand. "Can we go see the apple trees?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, voice rough. "We can do that." We walked together toward the fence line, the land stretching around us waiting. Vernon showed up with cornbread wrapped in foil for the third time that month. 3 days after Ivy and I had walked back from the meadow, I'd managed to pull myself together enough to receive visitors. Vernon Weaver, 68, had lived 3 properties down for 40 years and brought cornbread when words felt inadequate. "Coffee," I offered, opening the screen door. "If you're making some." We sat on the porch in the winter sunlight. Vernon unwrapped the cornbread, still warm, smelling of butter and honey. I poured 2 cups from the pot I'd made an hour ago. "How you holding up?" Vernon asked. "Better than I expected," I said. "Worse than I hoped." Vernon nodded. He'd been at Constance's funeral 4 years ago, had watched Adrienne grow up, had probably seen this coming from further away than I had. "There's something I need to tell you," Vernon said. "About that day I mentioned Corbin to you, about Harlan Doss." I set down my coffee cup. "All right." "Harlan Doss threatened me over disputed land 20 years ago," Vernon said. "Boundary line between his property and mine. He claimed I'd moved stakes, said he'd make me regret it if I didn't fix it. Got real specific about how he'd do it." I waited. "I recognized Corbin the first time I saw him with Adrian," Vernon continued. "Looked just like his father. Same build, same way of moving. I wasn't sure Harlan died in prison before I could ask anyone, but I thought you should know." The cornbread tasted like ash in my mouth. Vernon had seen the danger before I had tried to warn me in the only way he could without making accusations he couldn't prove. "Your words saved everything," I said quietly. Vernon shook his head. "You saved it. I just pointed. You pointed in time for me to act. That matters more than you know." We finished the cornbread in comfortable silence. Some debts get paid in cornbread and coffee, others in federal prison time. Vernon had paid his 20-year-old fear forward by warning a neighbor. Corbin was paying his schemes back in a cell that would hold him for the next 12 years. Vernon left with an empty foil and a handshake that said more than words could. 2 days later, Simone Hoffman stood at my front door with her leather messenger bag and a reservation back to Atlanta. "I wanted to say goodbye in person," she said. We stood in the doorway, and I realized I didn't know what to say to the woman who'd built the evidence fortress that saved my family. "You're the smartest person I've ever worked with," Simone said, extending her hand. I shook my head. "No, my wife is the smartest. I just followed what she prepared." Simone's expression softened. "Your wife was a genius. She protected Ivy," I said. "Yeah, she did." Simone shifted her bag to her other shoulder. "Take care of that granddaughter." I watched Simone walk to her car and drive down the gravel path toward the main road. Raised my hand in a slight wave as she disappeared around the bend. I stood on the porch until the dust settled. 6 weeks after the trial, Adrienne's letter arrived. 4 pages handwritten on prison stationery, my name and address in her familiar script. I opened it at the kitchen table with my morning coffee, Hayes already gone to work, Ivy still asleep upstairs. The first sentence was simple: "I'm sorry." The rest explained Corbin. Not as excuse, but as documentation. The first time he'd threatened her. The first time she'd been afraid to leave. The financial dependence he'd engineered. The way he'd isolated her from family while pretending to bring her closer. I read it twice, looking for manipulation. Found only exhaustion and truth rendered in careful handwriting. The same drawer that held evidence of betrayal now holds a daughter's surrender. I thought about the desk drawer in my bedroom where I'd found the photocopied will months ago. Now I would place her letter in Constance's desk drawer, the antique secretary in the living room where my wife had kept important papers. The final paragraph made my hands shake. Dad, Grandma was right about me. I made every bad choice she was afraid I'd make. I chose a con artist over my father. I chose theft over honesty. I chose greed over my own daughter's welfare. Grandma was right about me, but Grandma was also right about Ivy. Keep the baby. Raise her to be better than I was. Teach her about the land the way Grandma taught you. I'll be out in 3 years if I keep cooperating. Maybe by then I'll have learned to be someone worth knowing. Until then, keep the baby. The phrase, keep the baby, broke something in my chest. Ivy was 12 years old, not a baby, but to Adrienne she would always be the infant she'd held in the hospital. The daughter she'd loved imperfectly and lost completely. I folded the letter carefully, creasing it along the original lines. Walked to Constance's secretary and opened the drawer where she'd kept birth certificates and insurance papers and the deed to our North Carolina house. Placed Adrienne's letter inside next to Constance's death certificate. The drawer that had held my wife's final documents now held my daughter's surrender. I walked to the porch with my coffee gone cold now, but I drank it anyway. Sat in the Adirondack chair and looked out at the land. 47 acres stretching toward the Pine Ridge. 2 apple trees still standing where Constance's grandmother had planted an orchard. The cabin where 3 generations of Mercers now lived, smaller family than before, but family nonetheless. The land would belong to Ivy when she turned 25. Until then, I would tend it the way Constance had taught me. Would teach Ivy the way Constance would have wanted. Would keep the baby. I sat with my cold coffee and watched the February morning brighten across Georgia earth that had survived worse than this and would survive long after I was gone. Now, Grandpa, how do you plant these? 2 months had passed since I'd sat on the porch with Adrienne's letter and cold coffee. February had turned to March to April, and now Ivy knelt in the garden with a packet of tomato seeds in her palm. Spring had arrived in Georgia. The earth smelled like possibility. "And dig a small hole," I said, kneeling beside her. "Place the seed. Cover it with soil." Ivy's fingers worked carefully, making small depressions in the freshly turned earth. I'd spent the previous weekend preparing the garden bed, same plot where Constance had grown tomatoes for 40 years. Same soil, different hands tending it. "Like this?" Ivy asked, dropping a seed into the hole. "Perfect. Now cover it gently." Hayes stood on the porch behind us, coffee mug in hand, watching his niece learn what his mother had taught me decades ago. Our eyes met across the yard. He nodded. I nodded back. 3 generations of Mercers on this land. Different configuration than Constance had imagined, but family nonetheless. "When will tomatoes grow?" Ivy asked, patting down the soil over her 3rd seed. "Takes time," I said. "But if you take care of it properly, water it, pull the weeds, give it sunlight, it will grow." Ivy looked at me with Constance's dark eyes. "Like the land." "Yeah," I said quietly, "like the land. We planted 15 seeds that morning." Ivy's hands got dirty, her jeans stained with Georgia clay. She laughed when a robin landed 3 feet away, tilting its head to watch us work. The sound of her laughter carried across the field toward the Pine Ridge. Hayes brought us water at noon. We sat in the grass beside the garden bed, drinking from mason jars, while the April sun warmed our shoulders. Nobody talked about Adrienne in prison, or Corbin awaiting appeal, or the will that had saved everything. We just sat in the spring sunshine, 3 people who'd survived worse. Seeds in the ground, grandchildren in the house, land under their feet. Legacy looks like this. That evening, after Ivy had gone to bed, and Hayes had retreated to his room, I sat in Constance's reading chair for the 2nd time since her death. The first time had been the night before I'd confronted Adrienne and Corbin kneeling beside yellow lamplight, making promises to a woman 4 years gone. This time I didn't kneel. Just sat in the chair that still held the impression of her body, the armrests worn smooth by her hands. "Sheep," I said to the empty living room. "Everything is over." The house creaked in response. Old wood settling, nothing supernatural. But I talked to her anyway. "Land is still here. Ivy is sleeping in your old room. Hayes gave it to her last month, said it felt right. Hayes is in the next room. We planted tomatoes this morning. Ivy asked when they'd grow." I closed my eyes, remembering Constance in this exact chair, reading glasses perched on her nose, planning 3 years ahead, while I focused on tomorrow. "I don't know if you can hear me," I said, "but I thank you for thinking of this beforehand, for seeing what I couldn't see, for protecting Ivy when I didn't know she'd need protecting." The yellow lamp cast shadows on the wall, my shadow, and the empty space where Constance's should have been. "We're okay," I said. "Not whole, but okay." That night I slept well for the first time since Constance had passed. Dreamless, peaceful sleep that lasted until dawn. The next morning, Conrad's email arrived while I was making coffee. The subject line read, "Case Summary, Final Evidence Details." I opened it, standing at the kitchen counter, steam rising from my mug. Conrad's precise legal language filled 2 pages, but one paragraph made me set the cup down carefully. "Decisive evidence against Mr. Riddle recovered photograph from Ms. Mercer's phone, deleted by user, restored by forensic recovery. Metadata timestamp shows photo taken April 8, 2023, 2:47 p.m. 3 minutes after Mr. Riddle's first documented visit to your residence." I read it twice. Adrienne had photographed my will 3 minutes after Corbin's first visit. Not weeks into their relationship. Not after months of manipulation. 3 minutes. He'd walked into my house for the first time, assessed the situation, and set her to work immediately. Sometimes the smallest act, one photograph of one document, becomes the thread that unravels everything. The photo Adrienne thought she'd deleted had been recovered by forensic specialists. The metadata date, time, location had proven Corbin's manipulation started from their very first meeting. Had shown the jury exactly how calculated his scheme was. Had been the difference between conspiracy charges and wire fraud between 8 years and 12. Constance's will, the document Adrienne had photographed, had protected Ivy in ways my wife couldn't have predicted. Not just legally by placing the property in Ivy's name, but evidentially by existing as the thing Corbin made Adrienne photograph, creating the digital trail that would destroy him. I put down my phone and walked to the kitchen window. Ivy was outside in her pajamas and rain boots, watering the tomato bed we'd planted yesterday. The morning sun caught her dark hair, Constance's hair, as she bent over the garden with careful concentration. Each plant received the same measured attention, the same gentle pour from the watering can. Steam rose from my coffee cup. Outside, spring sunlight fell on 47 acres that would belong to her when she turned 25. Inside the house, Hayes was starting to move around upstairs floorboards, creaking with familiar rhythm. I stood at the kitchen window, watching Ivy water the tomato plants we'd planted together, and thought about Constance sitting in her reading chair, planning 3 steps ahead while I managed today. Thought about her walking into Conrad's office in March 2016 to file a will she hoped I'd never read. Thought about her understanding years before Corbin Riddle appeared exactly what kind of danger Adrienne would face and exactly how to protect Ivy from it. Constance always sees 3 steps ahead of me. Outside, Ivy finished watering and looked toward the kitchen window. Saw me watching. Waved with her free hand, grinning. I raised my coffee cup in answer, standing in the April sunlight that filled my kitchen, watching my granddaughter tend the land that would someday be hers. And to you listening to my story, remember this: protecting what you love sometimes means making the hardest choices you'll ever face. Looking back now, I realize my biggest mistake wasn't trusting my daughter too much. It was not seeing the signs earlier. Constance saw them. My wife knew 3 years before she died what Adrienne might become. I was too close, too hopeful. Don't make my mistake. When someone you love shows you who they are, even your own child, believe them. Trust your instincts even when your heart wants to deny the truth. The lesson I learned is this: love doesn't mean blindness. You can love your family and still protect yourself. I believe God put me through this to teach me the difference between enabling and protecting. These grandpa stories aren't easy to share, but they matter. My granddaughter Ivy needed someone who could see clearly even when it hurt. Sometimes being a good father means saying no to your daughter to say yes to your granddaughter's future. That's what real love looks like. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation like this? What would you have done? Share these grandpa stories with someone who might need to hear them. And if you enjoy listening to real grandpa stories about family legacy and tough choices, please subscribe for more. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I read every comment, and your presence matters. Final note: while based on real themes of family and inheritance, certain details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What I hope you take away is the message about protecting what matters most.